C-26. How could this happen? Ethan silently moved through the shadows, relying on his domain of the dead ability to remain undetected. Every strike he made was precise, clean, and efficient, avoiding any unnecessary bloodshed that might alert the other awakeners. Their heightened senses, especially their sharp sense of smell, meant even the faintest hint of blood could give him away. After eliminating the 3 individuals in the first room, Ethan turned and slipped into the adjacent one. Inside, a female awakener lay in deep sleep, completely unaware of the danger. Ethan repeated his method, swiftly extracting her neurocore without hesitation. One by one, Ethan hunted down 5 awakeners in total, absorbing their neurocores as he went. Each time he consumed one, a familiar, sweet, cherry flavor filled his mouth. The taste triggered a flood of memories, pulling him back to a time long gone. He remembered the orphanage's backyard, where a cherry tree stood tall. When the fruit ripened, he and Mia, along with the other kids, would climb the tree, plucking the bright red cherries and stuffing their mouths full of sweetness. Their laughter would echo under the warm sunlight, carefree and full of life. Though those memories had long since faded, blurred by the passage of time, the taste brought them back vividly, as if those days had never left him. For a fleeting moment, he felt like that boy again, standing under the cherry tree. But the nostalgia didn't last. Ethan shook off the memories and pressed forward, his focus cold and unyielding as he continued executing his plan. He phased through the wall and entered a massive warehouse. The space was packed with supplies. Spices, drinks, sandwiches, sausages, bacon, bread, essentially everything you'd expect to find in a well-stocked supermarket. Without hesitation, Ethan waved his hand, storing the supplies into his spatial storage ring. Moving deeper, he discovered another warehouse. This one housed frozen goods, shrimp, crabs, seafood, and even fresh cuts of meat. Thanks to a backup generator, the refrigeration systems were still running, keeping everything in pristine condition. Ethan quickly claimed all of it. The next 2 warehouses were just as bountiful. One was filled with household appliances, cleaning tools, and detergents, practically everything needed for daily life. The only exception was the vegetable storage area, where most of the produce had rotted away, releasing a nauseating stench. Ethan didn't care. He wasn't much of a vegetable person anyway. To him, the decaying greens were meaningless. As he continued looting, 2 awakeners stationed outside on night watch began to sense that something was off. Marcus, it's already 2:05 a.m. Why hasn't Buck come to take over yet? A young man muttered, his voice laced with irritation. No idea. Marcus, an older man, replied with a frown, his tone carrying a hint of impatience. Maybe he overdid it last night with that woman and can't even get out of bed, the younger man sneered, his words dripping with sarcasm. I'll go check on him. The younger man stood up, clearly annoyed by Buck's tardiness. He walked straight to the first room and knocked on the door. Buck, get up and take your shift. Stop pretending to be dead and hurry up. Hey, did you hear me? No response. The uneasy silence sent a chill down his spine. Taking a deep breath, he braced himself and shoved the door open with force. What he saw froze him in place. Inside the room, 3 bodies lay on the bed, 2 women and 1 man. Their skin was pale, almost paper white, and their lifeless faces made it clear they'd been dead for some time. Shit, something's wrong. The young man shouted, his voice trembling as he spun around and yelled. Into the night. Everyone, wake up. Someone's been killed. His panicked cry shattered the stillness of the night like a thunderclap. In the main hall, the survivors stirred awake, rubbing their eyes and stumbling toward the commotion. What's going on? What happened? Is it zombies? Did they get in? The crowd buzzed with nervous chatter, fear spreading like wildfire among them. Amid the chaos, no one noticed the tall, lean figure standing quietly in the crowd. His expression was calm, detached, as if none of this concerned him. That figure was Ethan. Meanwhile, Marcus, the leader of the survivors and the awakener among them who had successfully condensed a crystal core, strode over quickly. His expression was grim, and his sharp gaze swept across the scene. Billy, what happened? Marcus asked in a low voice, his tone carrying a barely restrained anger. Buck. He's dead. Billy, a young man, pointed toward the room, his voice trembling noticeably. Marcus followed the direction of Billy's finger, and his brows furrowed instantly. His face darkened further, and a dangerous glint flickered in his eyes. Behind him, the other survivors began whispering among themselves. Fear and unease spread through the group like wildfire. How did he die? Don't tell me he got too excited last night and had a heart attack. Don't joke about that. Those 2 women are dead too. Could it be some kind of disease? Quote ellipsis quote. The murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Marcus's expression only grew colder and more severe. He slowly approached Buck's body, his brows tightly knit, his sharp eyes scanning every inch of the corpse. Thanks to his heightened senses as an awakener, Marcus quickly noticed something chilling. Buck's energy had completely vanished. His neurocore had been taken. But there wasn't a single wound on Buck's body. This is impossible, Marcus muttered under his breath, a flicker of shock flashing in his eyes. His gaze swept across the room, and his voice dropped to a cold, commanding tone. Who was staying in the rooms next to him? Bring them out. I need to ask them some questions. I don't know, Billy stammered, his face pale. It was clear he was just as shaken by the situation. Marcus turned his attention to the hallway and noticed that the doors to 4 adjacent rooms were still shut tight. His heart sank, a growing sense of dread creeping over him. As an awakener, his senses were razor sharp. With all this commotion, there was no way the people in those rooms hadn't heard anything. Unless, bang, 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 bang. Without hesitation, Marcus kicked open the doors to all 4 rooms in quick succession. What he saw inside made everyone gasp in horror. In each room lay a cold, lifeless body. Hiss. The crowd fell silent in an instant. The sight before them left everyone too stunned to speak. They were dead. All of them were dead. At that moment, a girl came running from the direction of the warehouse, her face pale with panic and urgency. Marcus. The warehouse. The supplies in the warehouse are all gone. What? Marcus's face turned ashen. He rushed toward the warehouse, flung the door open, and the sight inside nearly made his knees buckle. The warehouse, once filled with supplies, was now completely empty. This can't be real. It has to be an illusion. Marcus muttered to himself, gripping the doorframe tightly as if trying to steady his spiraling thoughts. He closed his eyes, focusing his mind, attempting to dispel any possibility of mental manipulation. But when he opened his eyes again, the scene remained unchanged. This wasn't an illusion. It was reality. How could this happen? Marcus's face was so dark it seemed like a storm was brewing. His fists clenched tightly, his knuckles turning white, his fury barely contained. The survivors around him stayed silent, the oppressive atmosphere thick enough to choke on. Added Nobleman at. Out of the original 12 awakeners, 5 were now inexplicably dead, leaving only 7. And to make matters worse, the warehouse, their lifeline, had been completely emptied. Without food, how were they supposed to survive? Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. His sharp gaze swept across the room as he spoke in a low, icy tone. Something, or someone, got in here. Marcus, a woman standing nearby spoke, her voice trembling with fear. She was clearly shaken to her core. To silently kill 5 awakeners and steal this much, what kind of ability could do that? I don't know, Marcus replied, shaking his head. A chilling glint flashed in his eyes. But I'm certain of one thing. They haven't left. What? Gasps erupted from the crowd. They're still in this building, Marcus said, his voice cold and commanding, carrying an undeniable authority. His eyes scanned the surrounding darkness, as if searching for something, or someone. The survivors were holed up in Westfield Century City, a sprawling shopping center covering over 1.3 million square feet. At this moment, the entire building was cloaked in shadows, save for the faint glow of emergency lights that barely illuminated a few dozen feet ahead. Beyond that, the darkness stretched endlessly. The thought of a monster, capable of silently killing 5 awakeners and stealing all their supplies lurking somewhere in the shadows sent a chill down everyone's spine. People glanced nervously around, their eyes darting into the darkness, trying to spot the hidden threat. But no one noticed Ethan, who stood quietly among them. His expression was calm, his gaze detached, as if he were nothing more than an uninvolved observer watching the chaos unfold. The survivors had no idea that the monster they feared was standing right in their midst. Ethan's eyes swept over the group, his face unreadable. Among the remaining 7 awakeners, 5 had condensed crystal cores, their abilities still unknown. He wasn't in a rush to act. Instead, he decided to play with them for a while. Meanwhile, the survivors' nerves were fraying, and their emotions were nearing a breaking point. What are we supposed to do without food? Lily, you owe me a chocolate bar from yesterday. Give it back now. Marcus, we should head back to Genesis Biotech HQ. Or maybe request a supply drop from them. Quote ellipsis quote. The crowd descended into chaos, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of panic and desperation. Marcus raised a hand, signaling for silence. Once the noise died down, he nodded and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "I'll consider it." But inside, his mind was a storm of anxiety and unease. He knew the truth. Losing this much food and 5 awakeners was a disaster. If Genesis Biotech HQ found out, they wouldn't just reprimand him, they'd likely send him straight to the labs as a test subject for live experiments. No, that couldn't happen. Marcus's expression darkened further. He had to find the monster and recover the stolen supplies before HQ caught wind of this mess. C-27 Filthy. 7 awakeners gathered in the dimly lit room, their faces barely illuminated by the faint glow of a single lamp. The atmosphere was heavy, the tension palpable. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice low and resolute. "We can't report this to the company. We have to recover the supplies ourselves." The other 6 nodded in agreement. No one objected. They all understood the stakes. If the higher-ups at Genesis Biotech found out about this blunder, the consequences would be catastrophic. But one of the younger men frowned, his voice tinged with hesitation. "Marcus, but we don't even have a single lead. How are we supposed to find them?" "There will be clues," Marcus replied, his eyes glinting coldly in the shadows. His tone carried an unshakable confidence. "Stealing that much material without leaving a trace? Impossible. And I'm certain that creature hasn't left this mall yet." "What about the survivors?" Billy asked, his brows furrowed, his voice laced with frustration. "They're scared out of their minds. How can we expect them to help us track down a monster? There's no way they'll agree to this." Marcus's expression darkened instantly, his tone as cold and sharp as ice. "They don't have to agree. They'll do it whether they like it or not. This company isn't a charity. We saved them so they could help us move supplies, not so we could babysit a bunch of useless freeloaders. In this world, only those who prove their worth deserve to survive." The room fell silent. The other 6 said nothing, but their eyes betrayed their agreement. At Nobleman at. Marcus's meaning was clear. If it came down to it, they'd use the survivors as bait to recover the supplies. No matter the cost. After all, this wasn't just any ordinary stash. These were resources worth billions. In a world like this, a few human lives were insignificant in comparison. When the meeting ended, Marcus returned to the survivors, his face as stern as ever. Standing in the center of the group, he spoke in a deep, commanding voice. "Listen up, everyone. We've made a decision. The supplies are missing, and we can't just sit around and do nothing. In times like these, we need to work together to get them back." The crowd fell silent, stunned by his words. "Go look for the supplies." Someone muttered, disbelief evident in their tone. "Is this a joke?" Another person shouted. "It's pitch black out there, and there might still be monsters in the mall. If you want to go, fine, but don't expect us to." Exactly. 5 awakeners were killed. What chance do we have as regular people? We'd just be walking to our deaths. Dealing with monsters is your job. We don't have any powers. Why should we risk our lives for this? The group erupted into chaos, voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and defiance. Every face was etched with terror and resistance. Marcus's expression grew darker with every passing second, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Finally, he raised his hand and shouted, his voice booming like thunder. "Enough. You're going, whether you like it or not. I'm not obligated to protect any of you. If you think you can just sit back and do nothing, then I'll throw you out of the mall right now." His words hit the crowd like a sledgehammer, silencing them instantly. No one dared to speak. The oppressive aura radiating from Marcus was suffocating, a stark reminder of the power and authority awakeners held in this post-apocalyptic world. Still, a few people began to waver. "To be fair, we wouldn't have survived this long without the supplies from the warehouse. It's only right that we help look for them. Yeah, there's so many of us. What's there to be scared of? Besides, that monster might just have some weird abilities. It doesn't mean it's unbeatable." True. Every ability has a weakness. The murmurs of doubt slowly shifted into reluctant agreement. Some of the survivors were starting to change their minds. Seeing this, Marcus seized the moment. His voice dropped lower, carrying a hint of temptation. "Listen carefully. I, Marcus, promise you this. Anyone who finds the supplies or provides useful information will be rewarded with enough food to last an entire year. A year's worth of food." The announcement hit the crowd like a bomb. In this world, food was more valuable than gold. Even when they had access to the warehouse, their daily rations were strictly limited, just enough to stave off hunger. A year's worth of food was an unimaginable luxury. The eyes of several burly men lit up with determination, as if they'd just been injected with adrenaline. Let's go. I want to see what this so-called monster really is. Exactly. There's so many of us. What's there to be afraid of? Whatever it is, it's probably just good at sneaking around and ambushing people. The crowd's mood began to shift, their fear gradually replaced by a growing sense of defiance. More and more people started to respond, their voices rising in agreement. Some turned on flashlights, while others used their phones to light the way. Beams of light crisscrossed the darkness, pushing back the oppressive shadows that surrounded them. In small groups of 3 or 5, the survivors began to spread out, searching every corner of the supermarket. But in the shadows, away from the flickering lights and the growing commotion, Ethan stood silently, his cold gaze fixed on the scene before him. His lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Interesting, he murmured to himself, before quietly retreating into the depths of the darkness, his figure melting away like a shadow swallowed by the void. The shopping mall was enormous. In its prime, it could accommodate tens of thousands of customers. But now, with only 200 survivors scattered throughout its vast halls, the space felt eerily empty and desolate. The survivors moved in small groups, their flashlight beams flickering like fragile fireflies in the dark, always on the verge of being consumed by the surrounding blackness. As time passed, the groups drifted further and further apart. Some began to slack off, slipping into corners to pretend they were searching. Others gave up entirely, curling up in hidden spots, hoping to avoid the dangerous task altogether. But Ethan's attention wasn't on these ordinary survivors. His gaze was locked firmly on the 7 awakeners. To him, the regular humans were of no interest. They were weak, their flavor, unappealing, not worth his time. The awakeners, however, were different. They moved cautiously, staying close together, never letting their guard down or straying too far from one another. Marcus, I feel like someone's following us, one of the female awakeners suddenly said, stopping in her tracks. Her brows furrowed as she glanced over her shoulder, her voice low and uneasy. She instinctively looked back, but all she saw was an expanse of impenetrable darkness. Nothing moved. Marcus shot her a glance, his tone calm but edged with impatience. Don't scare yourself. You're just too tense. Yeah, Marcus is right, Billy chimed in, trying to lighten the mood. I've felt the same way walking alone at night before, like someone's watching me. It's just your mind playing tricks on you. The more you think about it, the worse it gets. Just stop thinking about it, and you'll be fine. Really. The girl's voice still carried a hint of doubt, but she didn't press the issue further. The group continued their search, moving methodically from the first-floor lobby to the third floor. Their footsteps echoed through the cavernous mall, the sound unnervingly loud in the oppressive silence. Despite combing through nearly every corner, they found nothing. Damn it, Marcus muttered, standing by the railing on the third floor. His brows were deeply furrowed, his expression a mix of frustration and confusion. He leaned over the edge, scanning the open space below. From his vantage point, he could see the survivors scattered across the various floors, their flashlight beams darting through the darkness like restless fireflies. The search continued, but so far, there had been no reports of injuries or casualties. Could it be that the monster really left already? Billy asked, standing beside Marcus. His tone was hesitant, as if he didn't fully believe his own words. Think about it. It stole all those supplies and killed 5 of us. Why would it stick around and risk getting caught? Maybe, Marcus replied, though his frown deepened. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him. Hearing this, the female awakener let out a long sigh of relief, her tightly wound nerves finally beginning to relax. She raised her hand, clutching her stomach with an embarrassed expression. I can't hold it anymore. I've been too scared to go to the bathroom, but now I really can't wait. I need to go. Marcus nodded but still looked uneasy. Grace, go with Ella. The 2 of you can watch each other's backs. What? Grace threw up her hands in exasperation. She needs someone to go with her just to use the bathroom. Seriously. Stop complaining and go, Marcus ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Grace sighed, clearly annoyed, but followed Ella anyway. The 2 turned a corner and entered a deserted hallway. They didn't head for the restroom. Such formalities had long since disappeared in this post-apocalyptic world. Finding a hidden spot to relieve oneself was the new normal. The hallway was even darker than the rest of the mall, the kind of darkness where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. But as awakeners, their enhanced vision allowed them to make out their surroundings, even in such poor lighting. Hurry up, Grace said impatiently, standing with her back to Ella. Her tone was sharp, tinged with irritation. I know, Ella replied, walking over to a wall. She unfastened her pants and was just about to squat down when a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread washed over her. It was a feeling she couldn't put into words, a primal instinct screaming at her, as if an invisible force had wrapped itself around her, suffocating her. As an awakener, her senses were far sharper than those of ordinary people. And right now, every fiber of her being was screaming the same thing: danger. Extreme danger. Filthy. A low, chilling voice emerged from the darkness, like the whisper of a demon crawling out of the depths of hell. It carried a mocking, icy tone that sent shivers down her spine. Ella's head snapped up, her pupils contracting sharply. From the shadows, a figure slowly emerged. His face was deathly pale, almost ghost-like, his eyes cold and detached. His lips curled into a faint, mocking smile, as if silently condemning her actions. How could you stoop so low as to relieve yourself here? You, Ella's voice trembled, her body frozen in place. Instinctively, her hand began to rise, ready to activate her awakener ability. But she was too slow. A flash of cold light streaked through the air. The blade of a knife pierced her temple with surgical precision. C-28 could an ability like that really exist? The woman's body went rigid, her eyes wide open in terror. The horror and fear she felt in her final moments were frozen on her face. Her pupils slowly dilated as her lifeless body collapsed to the ground. Ella. In the darkness, Grace spun around sharply, just in time to see a shadowy figure pulling a dagger out of Ella's skull. Her heart sank like a stone, her pupils constricting as fear and rage surged through her. The monster was here. Grace's body tensed instantly, and the air around her grew icy cold. Her awakening ability was frost-based. Clenching her fists, she summoned freezing energy that coalesced into two razor-sharp ice spikes, extending from her palms. Without hesitation, she launched herself forward like a bolt of lightning, charging straight at Ethan. Her speed was astonishing, like a predator pouncing on its prey. The ice spikes sliced through the air with a sharp, piercing sound, their destructive force surpassing even that of bullets. But Ethan had no intention of meeting her head-on. At the last moment, his figure flickered and darted backward, melting seamlessly into the wall and vanishing without a trace. What? Grace skidded to a halt, her eyes scanning the area frantically for any sign of him. But all she saw was the cold, unyielding wall, completely empty. Where did he go? In that brief moment of hesitation, a dagger suddenly shot out from the wall, aimed directly at her head. The dagger moved with impossible speed, giving her no time to react. Instinctively, Grace tried to dodge, but it was too late. The blade pierced her skull with precision, driving straight through her head and extracting her crystal core in one swift motion. Her body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The ice spikes in her hands shattered into countless shards, scattering across the floor. It all happened so fast it felt like a nightmare. Ella. Grace. What happened? At the entrance to the corridor, Marcus's voice rang out suddenly. He and the others had sensed something was wrong and rushed over. But when they arrived, the sight before them froze them in their tracks. Two bodies lay on the ground. Ella and Grace's faces were twisted in terror, their heads intact, but their crystal cores had been taken. The way they died was identical to the 5 victims before them. A suffocating sense of dread settled over the group, an invisible pressure filling the air. 2 more were dead. Where's the monster? Where is it? The remaining 5 scanned their surroundings nervously, their eyes filled with tension and fear. They gripped their weapons tightly, terrified that they might be next. But the darkness around them had returned to an eerie stillness, as if nothing had happened. If not for the bodies at their feet, they might have thought it was all just an illusion. It's still here, Marcus said in a low voice, his tone laced with a chilling certainty. It never left. Billy's eyes were bloodshot, his chest heaving as his emotions teetered on the edge of collapse. Clenching his fists, he roared into the darkness, "Monster! Get the hell out here! Hiding in the shadows, what kind of coward are you? Come out and fight me one-on-one." His voice echoed down the corridor, but the only response was an oppressive silence. "Billy, calm down," Marcus barked, his voice firm. "Shouting won't help. We need to figure out how it's killing people." "Marcus, did you notice something?" asked one of the remaining women, the only female awakener left in the group. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. I did. Look at where Grace fell. It's strange. She was facing the wall. That means, before she died, she was attacking it. Attacking the wall. The group exchanged uneasy glances, and a bold theory began to take shape in their minds. Could it be, the monster is hiding in the walls? No, it's not hiding in the walls, Marcus said, shaking his head, his voice heavy. It can move through objects, walls, floors, even people. The others' faces grew even paler at his words. If that was true, the monster's ability was far more terrifying than they had imagined. Could an ability like that really exist? It absolutely does. Marcus's voice was low and steady, carrying an air of certainty. And the fact that it can move large amounts of supplies in such a short time proves it. Combine that with its behavior, and it's clear, it has some kind of spatial manipulation ability. It might have even awakened absolute domain. What? Absolute domain? The four of them practically shouted in unison, their faces frozen in shock. After the apocalypse began, Genesis Biotech had captured countless zombies and mutated beasts to use as research subjects. Scientists discovered that a rare few of these creatures could awaken strange, terrifying abilities. Among them, the most feared was absolute domain. Creatures with this ability could appear and disappear at will, killing without leaving a trace. Genesis researchers classified these zombies as phantom infected. Are you saying we're dealing with a phantom infected? Billy's voice trembled slightly, his eyes betraying a fear he couldn't hide. That's right. Marcus nodded grimly. And it's obvious this zombie doesn't just have absolute domain, it's also highly intelligent. It's a master of stealth and evasion, and its lethality is off the charts. If we don't take it out before it evolves into a zombie king, the consequences will be catastrophic. The others' faces grew even paler. A chill seemed to creep up their spines, freezing them in place. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of Marcus's words pressed down on them like a suffocating fog. Then Billy, as if grasping at straws, tried to reassure the group. But hey, we don't need to panic too much. Didn't the researchers say that zombies with absolute domain usually have weak physical bodies? That's their Achilles heel. Well, that's something, I guess, someone muttered, their voice tinged with forced optimism. No wonder it doesn't fight us head on. It's only brave enough to attack from the shadows. At nobleman at. The group let out a collective sigh of relief, though the tension in the air remained thick. Billy nodded, his tone growing more serious. The real question now is, how do we find it? Exactly. Marcus fell silent for a moment, deep in thought, before speaking again. With our current strength, if that zombie doesn't show itself, we might never find it. But, he paused, his eyes narrowing with determination. Maybe we can outsmart it. No matter how clever a monster is, it can't outthink humans. Humanity had survived on Earth for millions of years, not because of brute strength, but because of its intelligence. Even the most cunning prey could be lured into a trap. Marcus's suggestion lit a spark of hope in the group. They quickly huddled together, brainstorming a plan to draw the zombie out. We could have someone pretend to get separated from the group, act as bait, and lure the zombie into the open. Once it shows itself, the rest of us can ambush it and take it down for good, Marcus proposed. But being the bait is way too dangerous. We'd need someone strong enough to handle it, one of them pointed out, voicing the obvious concern. Without hesitation, Marcus said, I'll do it. I'll head to the first floor lobby while the rest of you stay on the third floor. The view from up there is clear, you'll be able to spot it the moment it appears and attack immediately. And remember, zombies with absolute domain have weak physical bodies. Get in close and take it down fast. Don't let it escape again. Marcus, it's too risky for you to go alone. A tall, muscular man frowned. Let me go with you. If the zombie sees two people, it'll still attack. Marcus considered this for a moment, then nodded. All right, Kevin, you'll come with me to the first floor. Billy, you stay on the third floor with the others. Whatever happens, don't split up. Got it, Marcus. Billy thumped his chest, his voice filled with a simmering anger. This time, we're taking it down for good. That thing's been toying with us for too long. 7 of our teammates are dead because of it. Tonight, it's payback time. The group's morale surged as they quickly moved to carry out the plan. But what they didn't know was that Ethan was hiding just next door, less than 70 feet away. Thanks to his heightened zombie senses, he had heard every word of their plan, clear as day. Well, plotting out loud. How considerate of them, Ethan muttered, a cold smirk curling at the corner of his lips. In a flash, his figure disappeared from the room and reappeared in the hallway, the very spot the group had just left. Standing in the shadows, his icy gaze pierced through the darkness. He whispered to himself, his tone dripping with disdain, "These humans, they've got some brains. But that's about it. C-29 What's so dangerous about the first floor?" At this point, only 5 awakeners remained in the group. 3 of them had already formed crystal cores, making them formidable opponents, while the other 2 were still at the neurocore stage. Though they hadn't reached their peak, their physical strength far surpassed that of ordinary humans. Even so, for Ethan, taking them head-on wouldn't be much of a challenge. Down on the first floor, Marcus and the towering Kevin had just arrived in the lobby. A few survivors immediately rushed over to them, their faces filled with anxiety and unease. "Marcus, we've searched the entire mall, but there's still no sign of that monster," one of the survivors complained, frustration evident in his voice. Marcus glanced at them, his tone laced with irritation. "Of course, you couldn't find it. That thing's way too cunning." He couldn't help but feel annoyed. The monster seemed to target only awakeners, leaving the ordinary survivors completely unharmed, not even brushing close to danger. Huh. The survivors exchanged confused looks, clearly not understanding what Marcus meant. "Don't worry. We'll deal with it soon enough," Marcus said firmly, trying to reassure them. Meanwhile, on the 3rd floor, Billy stood by the railing with 2 other awakeners, a man and a woman. Their eyes were locked on the lobby below, scanning for any sign of movement, afraid to miss even the smallest clue. At Nobleman at. "Stay sharp. If Marcus and Kevin get attacked, we need to move in immediately," Billy said in a low voice. "Got it," the other 2 replied in unison, their expressions tense. What they didn't realize was that Ethan had already emerged from the shadows of the corridor, silently approaching them from behind. The female awakener, with her sharp instincts, suddenly felt a strange unease, as if something, or someone, was watching her. She spun around abruptly, her gaze locking onto a tall, slender figure. Standing there was a young man, impeccably dressed. His face was strikingly handsome, with sharp, chiseled features that seemed almost too perfect to be real. There was an undeniable allure about him, one that was impossible to ignore. The girl froze for a moment, then let out a long breath and patted her chest. "Phew. You scared me. I thought you were the monster." "Monster." Ethan chuckled softly, a faint trace of mockery in his tone. "What monster?" Hearing the commotion, Billy and the other man turned around as well. They instinctively assumed Ethan was just another survivor. "Not bad, kid. You actually made it all the way up to the 3rd floor," Billy said, frowning slightly, his tone carrying a hint of impatience. "Had nothing better to do, so I figured I'd take a look around," Ethan replied casually, stepping forward to stand beside them at the railing. His gaze drifted lazily down to the lobby below. Standing this close, the female awakener caught a faint scent of laundry detergent coming from him. She couldn't help but glance at Ethan again, her eyes lingering on his sharp profile. That face. It was perfect, like it had stepped straight out of a Hollywood movie. Her heartbeat quickened, skipping a beat before she could stop herself. If it weren't for the tense situation they were in, she might have found herself completely lost in the moment. "There really is a monster in this mall," she said instinctively. "You should stick with us. The first floor might be dangerous." "What's so dangerous about the first floor?" Ethan asked, his tone light and teasing. Billy, already short-tempered, grew more irritated at the question. "Why are you asking so many damn questions? Stop distracting us and let us do our job." Ethan's lips curled into a faint smirk, his voice tinged with amusement. "Then why don't you think the 3rd floor is more dangerous?" Billy froze, his brow furrowing. Something about Ethan's words felt off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The female awakener, however, suddenly remembered something. She replayed the moment Ethan had approached them in her mind. In the dimly lit mall, it was nearly impossible for an ordinary survivor to navigate without a flashlight or phone for light. Yet Ethan hadn't used anything. He'd moved with ease, as if the darkness didn't bother him at all. He'd even found the railing without hesitation. And then there was his movement. His footsteps had been so light, so silent, that she hadn't even noticed him until he was right behind her. It was as if he didn't weigh anything at all. A chill ran down her spine, the cold dread creeping up from her back to the top of her head. Sweat beaded on her forehead and slid down her face. She finally realized the horrifying truth. The person standing next to her wasn't human. "It's him. Attack now," she screamed, her voice sharp with panic. Billy reacted instantly, lunging at Ethan with the speed and force of a predator. His hand shot out like a steel claw, aiming to grab Ethan and pin him down. But Ethan moved like a phantom, effortlessly stepping back and dodging Billy's attack. "Think you can run? Die, you bastard!" Billy roared, charging after him. His muscles bulged grotesquely, swelling to the size of boulders as his uniform stretched to its limit. With a thunderous roar, he threw a punch, putting every ounce of his strength into the blow. He was determined to crush Ethan completely. Ethan stood his ground, a flicker of interest flashing in his eyes. He'd been meaning to test his physical limits. The last time he'd fought someone, Alex, he'd killed him with a single punch. This time, he decided to hold back, using only half his strength. Ethan raised his fist, meeting Billy's attack head-on. Boom. The moment their fists collided, a deafening explosion echoed through the mall. The sheer force of the impact sent a shockwave rippling outward like a hurricane, shaking the third floor railing violently. The metal groaned under the strain, screeching with a sharp, grating sound. Crack. A sickening snap followed. Billy's eyes widened as a searing pain shot through his arm. He looked down in horror to see his entire arm shattered, the bone pulverized into fragments. It hung limply at his side, twisted into an unnatural angle. What the hell? How is he this strong? Billy gritted his teeth, cold sweat pouring down his face like rain. Staggering backward, he clutched his mangled arm with his remaining hand, his eyes filled with terror and disbelief. It finally dawned on him. This man's strength was far beyond anything they had anticipated. He wasn't anything like the scientists had described, a zombie with absolute domain but a frail body. That punch, Billy had thrown everything he had into it. It was a blow powerful enough to crush an armored vehicle into scrap metal. Yet Ethan had brushed it off effortlessly, countering with enough force to obliterate his arm. A wave of despair crashed over Billy, drowning him in its suffocating depths. It was like staring into the maw of an unstoppable predator. Damn it! Which idiot scientist created this freak? If I get another life, I swear I'll hunt them down and kill them myself. That was Billy's final coherent thought. But he didn't even have time to dwell on it. As he staggered in pain, Ethan moved. His figure blurred, a streak of black lightning slicing through the air as he closed the distance to Billy's two teammates. Slash. Two arcs of crimson light flashed in the darkness. The sound of flesh being pierced echoed, sharp and chilling. The two awakeners, still stuck in the neurocore stage, didn't even have time to react. Ethan's strikes were precise, clean, and merciless. Both of their throats were pierced in an instant. Their bodies froze, collapsing to the ground like puppets with their strings cut. Their lifeless eyes remained wide open, frozen in an expression of pure terror. The entire encounter lasted mere seconds. In that brief span of time, Billy and his teammates were utterly annihilated. Meanwhile, on the first floor, Marcus was speaking with a group of survivors, trying to calm their nerves. But then, a muffled thud echoed from the third floor. The sound was followed by the violent rattling of the railings above, accompanied by the sharp screech of twisting metal. Something's wrong. Marcus's expression darkened instantly. He snapped his head upward, trying to spot Billy and the others. But all he saw was darkness. The third floor was pitch black, shrouded in an eerie silence. Damn it! He cursed under his breath, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. The tall man standing beside him, Kevin, also sensed that something was off. His voice was urgent. Marcus, Billy and the others must have been attacked. We need to get up there now. Wait. Marcus raised a hand, stopping him. His brows furrowed, his expression a mix of hesitation and caution. A thought raced through his mind. They might have completely underestimated the monster's strength. Billy was the second strongest in their group, a powerhouse awakener with immense physical strength. There was no way he could have been taken down so easily. And with two teammates by his side, even if they couldn't win, they should have been able to hold their ground for a while. But after that loud crash, there had been nothing. No sounds of fighting, no cries for help. Just silence. It was as if the three of them had vanished from existence. This isn't right. Marcus's pupils contracted slightly, a deep sense of unease creeping over him. His instinct screamed that something was watching them, lurking in the shadows like a predator waiting to strike. Marcus, what are you waiting for? Are you seriously not going to help Billy? Kevin's voice was filled with frustration and disbelief. Marcus took a deep breath, his tone low and steady. It's already too late. What? Kevin froze, his face a mix of shock and anger. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. But Marcus's gut told him the truth. The fight on the third floor was over, and it had ended swiftly and brutally. If they rushed up now, they'd only meet the same fate. Around them, the survivors began to sense the shift in atmosphere. They exchanged uneasy glances, fear creeping into their expressions. What's going on? Why is it so quiet up there? One of the survivors whispered nervously. I don't know, but I've got a really bad feeling about this, another muttered. The mall was plunged into darkness, the power long since cut. The only light came from the survivors, flashlights, their beams flickering as they swept across the shadows. The oppressive blackness seemed to press in from all sides, hiding dangers that felt all too close. Suddenly, one of the survivors, a burly man, felt something cold and wet drip onto the back of his neck. Huh, what the hell? He instinctively reached up, touching the spot. His fingers came away sticky and damp, with a faint metallic smell clinging to them. Frowning, he raised his flashlight to examine his hand. The moment the beam illuminated his palm, his face turned ghostly pale. Blood. It's blood. C-30 dinner is served. The sudden, piercing scream sent a chill through everyone's hearts, making them freeze in place before instinctively turning toward the source. What they saw made their blood run cold, a pool of crimson blood spreading slowly across the floor beneath the feet of a burly man. But what truly sent shivers down their spines was the realization that the blood wasn't his. It was dripping from the third floor above. What the hell is going on? Someone stammered, their voice trembling with fear. Flashlights immediately swung upward, their beams slicing through the oppressive darkness, desperate to uncover the truth hidden above. In the faint light, they could just barely make out a shadowy figure near the third floor railing. But before anyone could get a clear look, the figure dissipated like smoke blown away by the wind, vanishing without a trace. Ghosts. Someone screamed, their voice shaking with terror. I saw it. It was right there. But then, it just disappeared. Another person blurted out, their words tumbling over each other in panic. But where did it go? Murmurs spread through the group, their voices laced with dread and unease. The darkness around them seemed to grow heavier, suffocating, as if it were alive and pressing down on them. The beams of their flashlights darted frantically in every direction, searching for any sign of the figure. But no matter how hard they tried, the eerie shadow didn't reappear. Marcus's expression darkened, his face grim and tense. His sharp gaze swept across the room as he spoke in a low, steady voice. It's already here. It's come down. What? Someone gasped, their fear spreading like wildfire through the group. The survivors began to glance around nervously, their nerves stretched to the breaking point, ready to snap at any moment. But Marcus knew better than anyone else just how close the danger truly was. As a psychic awakener, his heightened senses allowed him to perceive things others couldn't. That suffocating, predatory pressure he'd felt moments ago, it had come from that thing. And now, he could feel it clearly. The creature's target wasn't just anyone. It was him. Suddenly, an unnatural, chilling presence surged from the shadows. Without a sound, Ethan appeared on the first floor, as if he'd stepped out of thin air. One moment, the space was empty, the next, he was simply there. He didn't bother hiding anymore. Instead, he stood openly before the group, his presence as undeniable as it was terrifying. The sound of gasps and screams erupted like an explosion. The survivors scattered in every direction, their panic driving them to flee as fast as they could. Some tripped and fell in their haste, but even then, they scrambled to their feet, crawling and stumbling to get away. They didn't care how they looked, anything to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Ethan. In mere moments, a wide, empty circle formed around him. No one dared to come within even a few feet of where he stood. But as much as they feared him, they couldn't help but be struck by his appearance. Ethan's face was unnervingly handsome, almost otherworldly. His features were sharp and clean, his expression cold and detached. He looked nothing like the grotesque monster they'd imagined. And that contrast only made him more unsettling, as if he were something far beyond human comprehension. Marcus and the burly man, however, didn't move. It wasn't that they didn't want to. It was that they couldn't. It felt as though an invisible force had pinned them in place, their breaths shallow and cautious. The oppressive feeling of being watched by a predator was suffocating. They both knew that any sudden movement could trigger a fatal response. It was like encountering a bear in the wild. Running would only provoke it. The only chance of survival was to stay still and hope it lost interest. But Ethan wasn't a bear. Marcus, we can't just stand here and wait to die. If we're going down, let's at least fight. The burly man whispered, his voice low but tinged with desperation and a hint of madness. Marcus shook his head, his eyes never leaving Ethan. If he's showing himself so openly, it means he's confident. He knows we're no match for him. If there's even the slightest chance, I'll hold him off. You run. The man hesitated, his jaw tightening. After a moment, he gave a reluctant nod. All right. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath, steadying himself. There was no turning back now. He focused his mind, summoning his psychic abilities. The air around him seemed to thicken, growing heavy with tension. His mental energy surged outward like a storm of invisible needles, all aimed directly at Ethan. This was no ordinary power. For most people, even a glancing hit from Marcus's psychic attack would leave them dazed or unconscious. A full-force strike could render someone comatose, or worse. But Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly, his lips curling into a chilling grin. His eyes glowed faintly red, a sinister light flickering in their depths. Interesting, Ethan murmured, his voice laced with amusement. The next moment, Ethan's absolute domain unfolded. It was part of his power, domain of the dead, a force that spread out like an unstoppable tide, completely nullifying Marcus's psychic attack. Marcus felt as though his mental energy had slammed into an invisible wall. The backlash hit him like a hammer, sending a sharp, splitting pain through his head. His vision blurred, and for a moment, everything went black. He nearly collapsed. Clenching his teeth, he bit down hard on his tongue, the sharp pain jolting him back to consciousness. Now, attack. I can't hold him off for long. He growled through gritted teeth. The burly man hesitated, his gaze fixed on Ethan. In his mind's eye, it was as if he were staring into an endless sea of blood. He knew that stepping into that domain meant certain death. My psychic power is still holding for now. Attack, or we'll lose even this slim chance. Marcus's voice was low and urgent, carrying a tone of unyielding determination. The man took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. There was no way out now. Even if the path ahead led straight to hell, he had no choice but to charge forward. All right, he barked, his voice filled with grim determination. His body tensed, muscles coiling like a drawn bow. His skin began to harden, taking on a rough, stone-like texture that gleamed faintly under the dim light. This was his awakened ability, steel skin, granting him extraordinary defense. In the next instant, he launched himself at Ethan like a cannonball, his heavy footsteps pounding against the floor with a resounding thud. Each step seemed to crack the ground beneath him. His fist clenched tightly, muscles bulging as he swung a devastating punch straight at Ethan's face. But the moment he stepped into the domain of the dead, his momentum faltered. His movements slowed as if he were wading through thick, invisible mud. Each step became a grueling effort, as though he were carrying an unbearable weight on his back. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to push forward despite the crushing pressure. Raw, he roared, throwing a powerful punch aimed directly at Ethan's chest. Ethan moved with effortless grace, tilting his body just enough to let the punch sail past him. His movements were fluid, almost elegant, as if he were toying with his opponent. At the same time, Ethan's hand shot out, his fingers curling like talons as they reached for the man's head. At it Nobleman at. Damn it. The man's heart sank as Marcus's earlier warning echoed in his mind. This guy can bypass your defenses and attack your insides directly. He twisted his body desperately, narrowly avoiding Ethan's grasp. But the oppressive force of the domain made his movements sluggish and clumsy. He stumbled, nearly losing his balance, and barely managed to steady himself. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead. That was too close, he muttered, his chest heaving as his heart pounded like a drum. In just one exchange, he had felt the icy grip of death looming over him. The adrenaline coursing through his veins was overwhelming, but it couldn't mask the growing sense of helplessness. As he tried to regain his footing, his body suddenly felt even heavier. His limbs stiffened, and it became nearly impossible to move. The pressure within the domain of the dead had intensified, locking him down even further. Raising his arm felt like trying to lift a mountain. What's happening? He gasped, his voice tinged with panic. He turned his head, searching for answers. What he saw made his blood run cold. Marcus was gone. The spot where Marcus had been standing was now empty. He ran. The man's heart sank like a stone. Marcus hadn't continued his psychic assault. Instead, he had used the momentary distraction to turn and sprint toward the mall's entrance. His figure disappeared into the shadows, his retreat frantic and unhesitating. Your leader abandoned you, Ethan said, his voice low and icy, with a mocking edge that cut deep. The words echoed in the man's ears like a death knell. The man froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't comprehend it. Marcus, who had just sworn to hold Ethan off and buy him time to escape, had turned tail and left him behind as bait. What a liar. The man muttered, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. He thought back to how Marcus usually acted, the dependable leader who always seemed to have everything under control, the one who was the first to step up in moments of crisis. But now, he finally understood. When true danger struck, Marcus's carefully crafted facade crumbled completely. Meanwhile, Marcus had already reached the mall's main entrance. His movements were frantic, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the chains binding the steel barricade in place. He muttered under his breath, over and over, like a mantra, "Screw brotherhood. Screw loyalty. This is the apocalypse. Survival is all that matters." With a final, desperate tug, he unfastened the last chain and shoved the heavy steel plate aside. Boom. The barricade fell with a deafening crash, kicking up a cloud of dust. The mall's entrance was finally open. A gust of cold night air rushed in, sharp and biting, jolting him awake. The faint light of dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon, painting the sky with pale streaks of gray. The first hints of morning were visible, fragile but undeniable. The dim light illuminated the scene outside the door. But as Marcus and the other survivors stood at the threshold, their steps faltered. No one cheered. No one rushed forward. Instead, an oppressive silence fell over them. Outside, an endless horde of zombies stretched as far as the eye could see, packed so tightly together that they seemed like a single, writhing mass. Thousands of hollow, lifeless eyes stared back at them, unblinking. At the forefront of the horde stood several figures that radiated an overwhelming sense of dread, special infected. There was the bulldozer, a hulking monstrosity with muscles like steel cables, its massive frame exuding raw, destructive power. Beside it stood Laura, a lithe, predatory figure with razor-sharp claws and an unsettlingly human-like grace. And then there was the one they called the PhD, a grotesque, twisted figure whose very presence seemed to ooze malice and intellect. These special infected didn't move. They didn't snarl or growl. They simply stood there, silent and still, like a forest of deathly statues. Their silence was far more unnerving than any roar or scream could have been. They were waiting. Waiting for something. Marcus's face turned ashen. His lips quivered, but no sound came out. His mind raced, but there was no plan, no escape. Only the crushing realization that he had just opened the door to hell itself. And then, from behind him, a voice broke the silence. Low, chilling, and dripping with malice, it sounded like a whisper from the depths of the abyss. "Dinner is served. C-31 Operation King Hunt will begin soon." The sound was like the call of death itself, chilling everyone to the bone and extinguishing any flicker of hope in their hearts. Ahead, a horde of terrifying zombies seemed to awaken, letting out ferocious snarls as their bloodshot eyes gleamed with a ravenous hunger. Among them, Bulldozer stood out, his expression disturbingly ecstatic. At Nobleman at. Boss really outdid himself today. An all-you-can-eat buffet with over 200 dishes on the menu. Roar. With a guttural howl, Bulldozer charged forward, leading his gang as they barreled into the crowd like a wrecking ball. Screams and cries of despair erupted as people scattered in every direction, desperate to escape. But the zombies were relentless, tackling them one by one, pinning them to the ground, and tearing into their flesh. The scene descended into utter chaos. The moment the doors were opened, humanity had already stepped into the abyss. Marcus felt a wave of despair crash over him. He was completely drained, his mental energy spent, leaving him powerless to resist. Only now did he fully understand. It was this very group of highly trained zombies that had overrun the prison and killed Alex. And now, Ethan had risen to become the Zombie King. A Zombie King with the power of absolute domain, a force so overwhelming it was practically invincible. How can humanity possibly survive this? This was Marcus's final thought before death claimed him. A searing pain tore through his body as Laura ripped him open, gutting him without hesitation. Once the Genesis biotech team was wiped out, the remaining survivors, ordinary people, stood no chance. They fell one after another, their futile resistance crushed, their bodies devoured by the ravenous undead. This was the true apocalypse. A world drenched in blood and slaughter, leaving nothing but helplessness and despair in its wake. Before long, the screams of the living faded into silence, replaced by the grotesque sounds of zombies feasting on flesh. The entire mall was overrun. Not a single soul survived. Ethan's expression remained cold and detached as he turned and began walking away. Behind him, Bulldozer, Laura, and the others followed obediently, their movements precise and disciplined. It's time to head back. After killing Marcus and his group, Ethan obtained 5 crystal cores. He consumed 3 of them, feeling a surge of power coursing through him. It was as if he was once again on the verge of evolution. However, the energy from the 3 cores was immense and would take time to fully absorb. For now, he decided to hold on to the remaining 2. On the way back, the sky began to lighten. In the world before the apocalypse, this would have been a bright, hopeful morning, with the sun rising to greet a new day. But now, all that lay before him was devastation. Corpses littered the streets. The entire city was a ruin. Ethan led his zombie followers through an abandoned city park. A broken swing creaked softly in the breeze. Rusted benches were stained with dried blood, and the air was thick with the stench of decay and death. Scattered zombies wandered aimlessly through the park. Some of them, eerily enough, seemed to be stuck in the routines of their former lives, their actions mechanical and hauntingly repetitive. An elderly man, dressed in a faded tracksuit, stood stiffly in the middle of a dilapidated basketball court. His hands clutched a cracked basketball as he tried to shoot it into the hoop. His movements were slow and jerky, and the ball slipped from his grasp, rolling to the ground. Yet he seemed oblivious, continuing to mimic the motion of shooting, over and over again. Not far away, an old woman staggered along a cracked pathway, pushing a rusted baby stroller. Her steps were unsteady, and the wheels screeched with every turn. She seemed trapped in an endless loop, walking the same path again and again. Ethan glanced over. Inside the stroller was a massive rat, its claws clutching something unrecognizable as it gnawed on it with relish. Before long, a few young zombies appeared up ahead. Unlike the stiff, mindless ones from earlier, these seemed more agile. Clearly, they'd fed on flesh recently. Roar. One of the zombies opened its mouth wide, baring sharp teeth, and let out a menacing snarl at Ethan. Ethan glanced at it, his expression calm. He hadn't expected such a small, insignificant zombie to dare growl at him. But then, he caught the meaning behind the snarl. This is my boss's territory. Outsiders aren't welcome here. It was clear this zombie served another leader. This area belonged to a different zombie king. No wonder it had the audacity to challenge him. Ethan quickly understood the situation. But Bulldozer, with his fiery temper, wasn't one to let such disrespect slide. Seeing a zombie growl at his boss, he stormed forward in 2 heavy steps, grabbed the offending zombie by the neck like it was a helpless chick, and slammed it into the ground with brutal force. Crack. The young zombie's body shattered into pieces, blood splattering across the ground. Still unsatisfied, Bulldozer turned to the rest of the small group of zombies and, with a few punches and kicks, reduced them all to mangled heaps of flesh. When he returned to Ethan's side, his face was full of smug pride, as if silently demanding praise for his work. Let's go. Time to head back, Ethan said casually, unfazed by the incident. He led his group of zombies away without a second thought. But from a distant hill in the park, a group of zombies watched the scene unfold. At the front of the group stood a towering figure, at least 6 feet 7 inches tall. His skin had a faint reddish hue, and thick black veins bulged across his face, forming grotesque patterns that made him look even more terrifying. Around his neck was something dark and furry, coiled like a massive scarf. Master, the humans in the shopping mall were hunted down by them, one of the zombies beside him communicated. This one had clearly evolved a significant level of intelligence, comparable to Laura's. The towering zombie let out a low growl, deep and guttural. He considered them all part of his territory. The humans inside had been his to hunt, to consume slowly over time. But now, another group of zombies had taken them all. The law of the wild was simple. 2 kings couldn't coexist in the same domain. Killing was instinctual for zombies, and by devouring the crystal cores of others, they could absorb their energy and grow stronger. It's time. The zombie king's eyes gleamed with bloodlust. Time to expand my territory. He had already marked Ethan and his group as prey. If his horde was to grow stronger, he would have to hunt down and kill other zombie kings. Squeak. Squeak squeak. The furry scarf around his neck suddenly let out a series of eerie squeaks. It wasn't a scarf at all. It was a massive rat. But what made it truly horrifying was its human-like head, covered in fine black hair, with a grotesque, twisted face that sent shivers down the spine. Ethan returned home and immediately took a bath. Afterward, he changed into a fresh set of clothes. Nina, his housekeeper, moved quickly and efficiently, tidying up the house until it was spotless. Every item was arranged with meticulous precision, so much so that even someone with OCD would feel at ease. After all, for most housekeepers, slacking off might cost them their paycheck. But for Nina, a poorly cleaned house could cost her life. When Ethan changed out of his clothes, Nina immediately took them to be washed. Even though Ethan hadn't physically touched anyone at the mall, his white shirt still carried faint traces of blood and the unmistakable metallic scent of violence. Nina could smell it clearly. Boss, you went out for dinner again?" she asked hesitantly. "Yeah, buffet," Ethan replied nonchalantly. Yikes, Nina shivered, pulling her neck back slightly. It must have been a big scene this time. But she didn't dare ask any more questions and quickly got to work washing his clothes. Ethan sat down and pulled out his phone, scrolling through the latest news online. Despite the chaos he'd just caused, Genesis Biotech hadn't yet discovered what had happened. Their official website still displayed an announcement. Operation King Hunt is progressing smoothly and will begin soon. The comments section was buzzing with activity. If they can wipe out the zombies, that'd be great. We could rebuild society. I really hope this mission succeeds. PFF'd. Genesis Biotech is just using this as an excuse to conduct human experiments. They don't care about humanity, they're only hunting zombies to further their own selfish goals. I wonder how this operation will turn out. Guess we'll just have to wait and see. C32 What awful weather. Genesis Biotech was a global leader in biotechnology. They had even launched rockets into outer space and maintained partnerships with numerous countries, wielding vast resources and influence. The branch in Los Angeles was just one of their many outposts, but even in this apocalyptic world, they were thriving. Genesis Biotech probably has a ton of good stuff, Ethan thought to himself, already scheming. But Genesis Biotech had at least 1,000 awakeners under their command. While Ethan was strong, he wasn't invincible. Taking them all down by himself was out of the question. Even if he brought Bulldozer, Laura, the PhD zombie, and his 2,000 elite zombies, breaking into their base still wasn't guaranteed. Unless he could command a horde of 1,000,000 zombies. Then he could storm anyone, anywhere, without hesitation. Maybe it was time to expand his territory. Ethan's current 2,000-strong zombie army only controlled the area around his building. He had initially gathered them just to keep his home base secure and avoid being disturbed. But now, Ethan was starting to think bigger, recruiting more forces, conquering new lands. Over the next few days, Ethan continued his routine of devouring meat and drinking blood. He absorbed all 5 crystal cores he had collected, significantly boosting his strength. His domain of the dead expanded in range and could now be fully unleashed for 20 minutes, with even greater destructive power. At Novelban at nightfall. Darkness blanketed the earth, and a blood-red moon hung high in the sky, staining the heavens with its ominous glow. It was yet another night of carnage. The area around the building had been restless lately. Zombies from other territories had been wandering into Ethan's domain, growling at Bulldozer and his crew in a clear display of provocation. These clashes often escalated into vicious brawls, with the two groups tearing into each other. Of course, Bulldozer wasn't one to back down. He smashed the heads of any intruding zombies without hesitation. Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing into the darkness outside. Suddenly, a faint squeaking sound echoed through the desolate streets. Moments later, pairs of glowing green eyes appeared, flickering with bloodlust. From the sewers along the roadside, a swarm of massive rats emerged. Each one was the size of a small pig. The rats squealed and sniffed the air, clearly searching for prey. It didn't take long for them to lock onto the zombies below the building. With a frenzied charge, they swarmed over one of the zombies, sinking their sharp teeth into its flesh. Roar. The zombie let out a pained howl as the rats clung to its body, biting and tearing. It staggered, trying to shake them off, but it didn't last long. Within moments, the zombie collapsed to the ground, and the rats devoured it completely, as if it had melted into the swarm. These mutated beasts treated zombies as a delicacy. The commotion quickly drew the attention of other zombies, who charged at the rats in retaliation. But the rats were incredibly agile, darting back and forth with ease, making them nearly impossible to catch. Some of the rats even taunted the zombies, zigzagging around them and dodging their attacks, leaving the zombies growling in frustration. Just as the rats were reveling in their dominance, a shadowy figure suddenly appeared, moving like the wind. With a flash of razor-sharp claws, the rats were sliced into pieces, their bodies falling to the ground in 6 neat segments. It was Laura, the female zombie. Her speed and agility were unmatched, allowing her to easily overwhelm the rats. A sinister smile spread across her face as she turned the slaughter into a twisted game. But she wasn't the only one joining the fray. From the shadows, a hulking figure emerged. Bulldozer stepped forward, his massive hands grabbing a rat midair. His fingers tightened, and despite the rat's frantic kicking and high-pitched squeals, it was no use. With a sickening crunch, Bulldozer crushed the rat in his grip. He licked the blood off his hand, his face lighting up with excitement. Without missing a beat, he stomped forward, crushing another rat under his boot, reducing it to a bloody pulp. Then, he grabbed 2 more rats, twisting them apart with his bare hands as if he were snapping cucumbers in half. The rats, clearly intimidated, began to scatter in all directions. Within moments, the swarm had vanished into the darkness, leaving the streets eerily quiet once more. Hehehehe tilde. Bulldozer chuckled foolishly, holding 2 blood-soaked rats in his massive hands. He jogged off to a nearby alley, where he began gnawing on them like they were roasted sweet potatoes. Blood splattered everywhere, drenching his face in crimson. He didn't dare eat them out in the open. Ethan had made it clear. Stop eating filthy things. That's junk food. If the boss caught him, he'd probably get scolded. Or worse, looked down on. Incidents like these, rat attacks or zombie provocations, had been happening frequently over the past few days. Ethan had grown so used to them that he didn't even bother intervening anymore. The next morning, thick, oppressive clouds blanketed the sky, so dark they looked like ink. Before long, rain began to pour down in sheets. But this wasn't ordinary rain. Mixed in with the raindrops were tiny black worms, falling from the sky like some grotesque gift from above. It was a worm rain. The worms, each about the size of a pinky finger, landed on the streets and abandoned vehicles, making a faint plip-plop sound as they hit the surfaces. Within minutes, they covered the ground in a writhing, squirming mass. Nina, who was inside the building, felt a chill run down her spine. The bizarre occurrences of the apocalypse were becoming more and more unsettling. Worm rain. What next? Ethan stood by the window, his sharp gaze fixed on the scene outside. His brows furrowed slightly. What awful weather. He recalled a news report from before the apocalypse. Back then, there had been stories of fish rain, in some places, caused by tornadoes sucking fish out of the water and dropping them from the sky. This, worm rain, was probably something similar. But these worms weren't ordinary. Their mouths were lined with sharp, needle-like teeth, and they burrowed into zombie flesh with terrifying speed. Zombies that were once agile and strong became stiff and unresponsive after the worms entered their bodies, as if their movements were no longer their own. Fortunately, Ethan's zombie underlings were highly intelligent. Before the worms could burrow too deep, they yanked them out and, in some cases, stuffed them into their mouths, chewing them up with relish. Bulldozer, in particular, was completely unfazed. His thick skin made him practically immune to the worms' bites. He grabbed a handful of them and, like a kid eating chips, dumped them into his mouth all at once. Apparently, he liked the taste. He tilted his head back, opened his mouth wide, and let the worms rain directly into his mouth, as if he were drinking the rainwater. Ah, thank you, Mother Nature, for this feast, he exclaimed, his voice booming with delight. The worm rain didn't last long. Within a few minutes, it stopped, leaving the streets littered with worms. They didn't seem to like sunlight, so they quickly burrowed into the sewers, soil, or cracks in the walls to avoid exposure. In the alley next to the building, Bulldozer crouched near the wall, his massive frame hunched over. He scooped up a handful of worms from the ground and began popping them into his mouth one by one, like he was snacking on sunflower seeds. Laura and the PhD zombie walked by and stopped to watch him, tilting their heads in curiosity. Hey, the boss said not to eat junk food, Laura reminded him, her tone half scolding. Shish. Bulldozer pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for her to keep quiet. He didn't want Ethan to find out. Then, with a mischievous grin, he held out a handful of worms to Laura. Laura tilted her head, her glowing eyes studying the wriggling worms for a moment. After some hesitation, she picked one up and popped it into her mouth. Not bad, she said, her face lighting up with surprise. The next thing you knew, she was crouched next to Bulldozer, the two of them munching on worms like kids sneaking snacks behind their parents' backs. The PhD zombie, arms crossed and leaning against the wall, watched them with a look of utter exasperation. You two are going to get caught. We won't, Laura said confidently, not even looking up. The boss loves staying inside. He barely ever comes out. She seemed to know Ethan's habits well. But just as she said this, a shadowy figure appeared at the entrance of the alley. A pale, sinister face emerged from the darkness, its expression cold and unreadable. C-33 crows, symbols of death and misfortune. Tastes good. Ethan's tone was calm, like he was just making small talk with friends. But Laura and Bulldozer immediately jumped up from where they had been crouching against the wall, standing ramrod straight. In the process, Bulldozer quickly moved his hand behind his back and quietly tossed the bug he was holding onto the ground. Then, with a goofy grin, he said, "Heh heh heh, boss, it was all Laura's idea. I didn't want to eat it at all." Huh. Laura turned to glare at him, speechless and a little annoyed. Her sharp nails dug into Bulldozer's side with a soft, PFFT, sound. In her mind, she cursed him. Why are you lying? But Bulldozer's thick skin made him practically immune to pain. He didn't even flinch. After all, he'd long since stopped caring about things like boiling water burns. Laura's little scratch didn't bother him in the slightest, and he just kept grinning like a fool. Ethan didn't seem too bothered by their antics. "I'm heading out for a bit. You two stay here and keep an eye on the place." "Oh, okay, sure." Bulldozer and Laura nodded quickly, though they couldn't help but feel a little curious. "Where's the boss going? If he's going hunting, could we tag along?" But since they'd already messed up earlier, neither of them dared to ask. Ethan shot the two zombies a sidelong glance. "Don't you two love eating bugs? While I'm gone, clean up all the bugs around the building. I don't want to see a single one when I get back." "Got it, got it." The two nodded like woodpeckers, their heads bobbing up and down. Ethan left the building. He had already absorbed all 5 of his crystal cores, so he figured it was time to head out and see if he could find another, lucky one, to hunt for more. On top of that, he wanted to investigate the recent rat swarm attacks and zombie disturbances. Since the situation was still unclear, Ethan decided not to bring along his thousands of zombie underlings. It was easier for him to move stealthily on his own. If he ran into danger, he could activate his domain of the dead to either fight or retreat as needed. He could come and go as he pleased. But his underlings weren't so lucky. If they ran into a pack of mutant beasts or a larger, hostile zombie horde, they'd be in serious trouble. And if that happened, Ethan would be left all alone, a king without an army. As for the rat swarm attacks and zombie disturbances, Ethan wasn't entirely clueless. He suspected the source was nearby, most likely tied to the zombie faction he'd encountered in the park the other day. So, he started heading in that direction. It had been a month since the apocalypse began, and the streets were now littered with rusting, abandoned cars. Once bustling roads were overgrown with weeds. The entire city felt desolate and ruined. The only things still moving were the zombies. Some stood motionless, others wandered aimlessly. They had no purpose, but the slightest sound or movement would activate them, sending them sprinting toward the source. Their terrifying faces, the low growls in their throats, and their bloodthirsty eyes all screamed of their insatiable hunger for flesh. When these wild zombies encountered Ethan, however, they didn't attack. In fact, they instinctively shrank back, parting to clear a path for him. At. But as Ethan continued forward, the number of wild zombies began to dwindle. The streets started to show signs of carnage. Scattered corpses of zombies lay everywhere, their bodies mangled and crushed as if they'd been run over by heavy machinery. They were nothing more than grotesque meat pancakes. This wasn't the work of humans. It was the result of a massive zombie horde trampling over its own kind. Low-level zombies lacked intelligence. When they charged forward in a frenzy, they didn't care about anything in their way. Inevitably, some unlucky ones got trampled to death. The larger the horde, the more casualties from friendly fire. Countless flies buzzed around the rotting corpses, their bloated green bodies much larger than before the apocalypse, each one about the size of a thumb. Their incessant buzzing was enough to drive anyone mad. By now, Ethan had entered the territory of another zombie king. The streets were littered with clumps of fur and black, pellet-like rat droppings, making the scene even more disgusting. Ethan could already picture it. Beneath his feet, in the sewers, there were undoubtedly thousands upon thousands of rats. They still retained their old habits, only coming out at night to scavenge for food. Not far off, a flock of pitch-black crows circled noisily in the sky, their harsh caws echoing as they spiraled around a tall building. Crows, symbols of death and misfortune. It was as if something inside that building had drawn them in, and they couldn't wait to get closer. Are there survivors? Ethan wondered, making a quick judgment before heading toward the high-rise. As he got closer, his suspicions were confirmed. The metallic tang of blood hit his nose. There were indeed living humans inside. But what puzzled him was the presence of zombies alongside the humans. Strangely, they seemed to be occupying the same space. What's going on? Without hesitation, Ethan activated his domain of the dead ability, slipping into stealth mode. His body became intangible, allowing him to phase through walls as he made his way toward the upper floors of the building. In this perilous post-apocalyptic world, invisibility was an invaluable skill. However, Ethan's stealth mode had one major drawback: he couldn't attack while hidden. The moment he struck, his physical form would be exposed. He stopped on the 18th floor. Ethan could sense it. This was the room. Inside were 4 humans and 1 zombie. Curiosity piqued, he phased through the wall and entered. The first room he stepped into was a cramped, dingy bedroom. The sight inside was horrifying. Blood was splattered everywhere. On the walls, the floor, every surface. The stench of iron and decay was overwhelming. The faint clinking of chains echoed in the room. Ethan turned his head toward the sound and saw a female zombie. Her hands were bound with chains, tied to the headboard of a bed. She thrashed and growled, her mouth snapping as she tried to break free. Across from her stood a man, a human. He had small, beady eyes and thick lips, and his gaze was fixed on the zombie with an unsettling intensity. Isla, my goddess, the man murmured, his voice trembling with emotion. Even though you've turned into a zombie, I'll still keep my promise to take care of you for the rest of your life. Do you remember? I once told you, no matter what you become, my love for you will never change. The female zombie snarled at him, her feral growls filled with rage. Drool dripped from her mouth, forming long, sticky strands. But the thick-lipped man didn't seem to mind. He smiled, his eyes narrowing with a strange affection. You're still the same, always so fierce with me. I chased after you for 10 years, you know. Every morning, I brought you breakfast. Even when you were living with your boyfriend, I brought 2 portions. But you never once looked at me. You always yelled at me like this. Wow. Ethan couldn't help but think to himself. This guy's the ultimate simp. Even the most desperate fanboys would bow down to him. If Sheep Rambler were here, he'd probably hand this guy a cigarette in respect. But the man didn't seem to care about how pathetic he sounded. Instead, his face was filled with a twisted kind of happiness. But now, things are different. You're finally with me. I can protect you forever. So what if it's the end of the world? Isla, my love, are you hungry? I'll go make you something to eat. With that, he turned and left the room, closing the door behind him. Ethan immediately followed, still in stealth mode. The man had no idea he was being watched. Ethan could sense it now. This thick-lipped man wasn't ordinary. His blood energy was unusually strong, far beyond that of a normal human. He was an awakener. The man walked into another room. When he opened the door, Ethan saw 5 other men inside. Their hands and feet were bound, and their mouths were sealed with duct tape. They could only let out muffled groans. The moment they saw the thick-lipped man, 3 of them began thrashing violently, their eyes wide with terror. But their bindings were tight, and their struggles were futile. The man narrowed his eyes, his lips curling into a smile as he slowly scanned the room. Let's see. Who's the lucky one today? Who gets the honor of becoming food for my darling Isla? C-34 good person. The 3 captives stared in terror, their faces pale. They knew exactly what kind of person this man was, a complete psycho who planned to feed them to the zombies. One of them trembled uncontrollably, trying desperately to shrink back into the corner. The man with thick lips noticed and smirked. All right, looks like it's gonna be you. Huh, no. MMMPH. MMMPH. The man's mouth was taped shut, so all he could do was let out muffled cries. Thick Lips strode over, grabbed him by the back of the neck like he was picking up a helpless kitten, and hoisted him into the air. Then, without hesitation, he turned and started walking toward the door. No matter how much the man struggled, it was useless. He could only watch in horror as they got closer and closer to the zombie room. His heart sank into a bottomless pit of despair. When the door creaked open, the stench of blood hit him like a wall. Inside, a female zombie was pacing restlessly, her eyes wild with excitement. She let out guttural snarls, her hunger palpable. Look at that, Thick Lips said, his voice filled with twisted affection. See how happy my baby Isla is. MMMPH. MMMPH. The man's muffled cries turned into full-blown sobs. Tears streamed down his face as he shook his head frantically. Thick lips ripped the tape off his mouth with a sharp tug. Got any last words? He asked, almost casually. Please. I'm begging you. The man wailed, his voice cracking. Don't do this. I don't wanna die. Please, I'll do anything. Thick lips shook his head, almost pitying him. You don't get it, do you? Witnessing the love between me and Isla, that's an honor. With that, he tightened his grip and began dragging the terrified man closer to the zombie. The man screamed, his voice raw with desperation, as he was pulled toward his gruesome fate. But just as the zombie was about to lunge, a shadow appeared behind them. Ethan had been watching from the sidelines, his expression cold and detached. He wasn't interested in the drama unfolding before him. To him, none of this mattered. The only thing of value here was the crystal core inside Thick Lips' head. He decided to end it quickly. Kill the guy, take the core, and leave. Huh. Thick Lips froze. He was sharp. He immediately sensed Ethan's presence the moment he appeared. He spun around, his eyes narrowing. Who the hell are you? How'd you get in here? But before Ethan could respond, something strange happened. The female zombie, who had been snarling and thrashing moments ago, suddenly went quiet. Her wild, bloodthirsty expression softened. She seemed subdued. Her eyes filled with something like reverence, even submission. What the? Thick Lips frowned, his confusion deepening. And then it hit him. This felt eerily familiar. It reminded him of the time he'd bent over backward to win the affection of a woman he worshipped, only to watch her grovel at someone else's feet. Jealousy flared in his chest, hot and suffocating. I'm an awakener now, he roared, his voice shaking with rage. People like you don't deserve to live. Ethan studied him calmly. The apocalypse had clearly done a number on this guy. Years of fear and repression had twisted him into something unrecognizable. Still, Ethan hesitated for a moment. Would absorbing this guy's crystal core mess with his own mind? He wasn't sure. At Nobleman at. Meanwhile, the captive man, still tied up, saw Ethan as his last hope. Hey, man, please, help me. This guy's a psycho. He's gonna feed me to that zombie. Ethan glanced at him, unimpressed. Oh, he muttered indifferently. So what if he's a psycho? Ethan thought. I'm a zombie myself. Thick Lips' face contorted with fury. His hands began to glow faintly red, and his aura surged. He was clearly an awakener with some kind of physical enhancement ability. Let me show you what an awakener can do. He bellowed. With a roar, he lunged at Ethan, his mutated hands clawing through the air with incredible speed. But to Ethan, it was nothing special. Just another fool trying to act tough. With a single thought, Ethan activated his domain of the dead. A wave of overwhelming pressure rippled outward, blanketing the room. Thick Lips froze mid-attack. His body locked up, completely immobilized, as if someone had hit the pause button. He stood there, trembling, unable to move a muscle. Thanks to Ethan absorbing 5 crystal cores, his domain of the dead had grown even more powerful. For most awakeners, stepping into his domain was like walking into quicksand, they couldn't move an inch. Thick Lips felt like he was carrying a mountain on his back. His legs trembled violently, barely able to hold him up. In his eyes, the world around him had turned blood red, like he was standing in the middle of a battlefield littered with corpses. And at the peak of this mountain of death stood Ethan, the undisputed ruler. How is this possible? Thick Lips stammered, his voice shaking with fear. His body trembled even harder. He had always been the one in control, the one deciding who lived and who died. He took pride in being an awakener, someone above the rest of humanity. But now, standing before Ethan, he couldn't even lift a finger to fight back. Ethan didn't care about his internal struggle. He simply walked toward him, step by step. Thick Lips could feel death closing in, like the Grim Reaper himself was approaching. He knew what was coming. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, he slowly turned his head, his movements stiff and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. His gaze locked onto the female zombie. If I can't escape death, he thought, then at least let me look at her one last time. That was his final thought. Ethan's slender fingers pierced through his skull with ease, breaking through the bone like it was paper. He reached inside and pulled out the crystal core. Thick Lips' body went limp. His vision went dark, and he collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Just like that, he's dead. The tied-up man nearby stared in shock, his jaw practically hitting the floor. He had no idea what had just happened. All he saw was Ethan calmly approach Thick Lips and kill him as if it were nothing. Damn, Man, you're incredible. The man shouted, his voice filled with a mix of awe and desperation. Come on, help me out. Untie me. Ethan glanced at him, his expression indifferent. He didn't move. Did I ever say I was going to save you? Wait, what? The man's face fell as he realized what Ethan's silence meant. The hope that had briefly flickered in his heart was snuffed out, plunging him back into despair. Just then, a sound came from the bedroom window, a faint flapping of wings. A massive crow landed on the balcony. The bird was enormous, standing nearly 3 feet tall. Its eyes glowed an eerie red, and its glossy black feathers shimmered like polished obsidian, sharp and menacing, almost like blades. Clearly, it had been drawn here by the scent of blood. Its crimson eyes peered through the gaps in the metal railing, staring intently into the room. I'm hungry, so hungry, can you open this for me? Please. Oh, Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised. He hadn't expected the crow to speak. Was it some kind of mutant? Maybe a crossbreed with a parrot? And it was polite, too. Ethan glanced at Thick Lip's corpse on the floor. It wasn't of any use to him anymore. Curious, he walked over to the window and, with a sharp push, broke open the metal railing. Thank you. Thank you. The crow wasted no time. It smashed through the glass and swooped into the room, heading straight for Thick Lip's body. Without hesitation, it began tearing into the corpse. Its beak was razor sharp, slicing through flesh and bone like a guillotine. In one bite, it severed Thick Lip's arm and swallowed it whole, bones and all. The sight was horrifying. The crow devoured the body with terrifying efficiency, leaving no trace behind, not even a scrap of bone. The tied-up man was frozen in fear. He had thought zombies were the worst thing the apocalypse had to offer, but now he realized there were even more terrifying creatures out there. And the crow wasn't even that big, yet its appetite was insatiable. In no time, Thick Lip's corpse was completely gone. The crow licked its beak, looking like it still wasn't satisfied. Its glowing red eyes shifted to the tied-up man. But it hesitated, glancing at Ethan as if seeking permission. In a strange, guttural voice, it asked, I'm still hungry. Can I eat him too? Ethan shrugged. Go ahead. The crow tilted its head, almost as if it were nodding in gratitude. Thank you. Thank you. You're so kind, giving me your food. You're a good person. You're welcome, Ethan replied casually. Wait, what? The tied-up man's eyes widened in disbelief. He stared at the two of them, completely dumbfounded. Good person. Are you kidding me? C-35 interesting. The next second, a red-eyed crow swooped down at him, and the man completely lost consciousness. The crow's sharp beak pierced through his heart, and then it began feasting on him with gusto. After devouring the man, the crow seemed satisfied. It flapped its wings a few times and flew out the window. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, I'll repay you someday. Its distinct bird call echoed in the sky, growing fainter as it disappeared into the distance. ... Well, now this is interesting, Ethan muttered, intrigued. He had obtained a crystal core, so this trip wasn't a total waste. Suddenly, he remembered there were 2 survivors in the room across the hall. The 2 were still trembling, their faces pale with fear. Although they had narrowly escaped death earlier, they knew it was only a matter of time before they ended up as zombie food. The agonizing wait for death was almost worse than dying outright. At least that would have been quicker. Just then, the sound of footsteps approached the room. He's coming back. Did the female zombie not get enough to eat? Their hearts leapt into their throats as the footsteps grew closer. But when the door opened, it wasn't the thick-lipped man from before. Instead, it was a tall, lean young man with strikingly handsome features. Huh. The 2 froze for a moment, then their expressions shifted to one of cautious hope. Could it be someone from a rescue team? Ethan scanned them with a calm gaze, already thinking about what to do with them. Killing them outright seemed pointless. They were just ordinary people, and their only real use was as bait. Because Ethan had a hunch. There weren't many zombies in the area around this high-rise. Instead, there were rat droppings and fur everywhere. Something was definitely lurking in the shadows. He could use these 2 to draw it out. You 2, get out of here, Ethan said, pulling out a knife and cutting the ropes binding them. The 2 survivors were overjoyed. They had been resigned to their deaths, but now, miraculously, someone had come to save them. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my God, thank you. The man broke down in tears, sobbing uncontrollably. The other survivor, more composed, asked cautiously, Are you with the rescue team? Can you take us to a shelter? No, Ethan replied, shaking his head. I've got other things to do. You're on your own. Ah, But the two hesitated. The outside world was dangerous, and without an awakener to protect them, their chances of survival were slim. But after weighing their options, they decided to leave. Staying in this hellhole wasn't an option either. Before leaving, they raided the kitchen for supplies, grabbing some food, a few kitchen knives, and even a boning knife. They were surprisingly well prepared. Still, Ethan knew their odds of surviving in this area were less than 1%. Whether they made it out alive would depend entirely on their luck. To be fair, this part of the city wasn't the most dangerous for ordinary people. If they'd been in Ethan's territory, they wouldn't have lasted a second. Once they were ready, the two quietly opened the door and tiptoed down the stairs. The faint growls of zombies echoed through the stairwell. If they made too much noise, they'd be torn apart in an instant. Ethan stood on the balcony above, watching the situation unfold below. He was deep in thought. Wouldn't it be boring if the bait I just let loose died before even leaving the building? Fortunately, about 10 minutes later, he saw two figures emerge from the building's entrance and step onto the street. They moved cautiously, sticking close to the walls of the building as they crept forward. Every step was deliberate, every movement careful. They were being as cautious as humanly possible. Ethan watched with keen interest, curious to see if the two would survive, or, more likely, how they would meet their end. On the street below, one of the men grumbled as they walked. "Oscar, that so-called rescue guy was so irresponsible. He just let us go on our own. If we make it to a shelter, I'm definitely reporting him." "What are you even talking about? Be grateful he let us out at all. Besides, have you thought about it? Was he really part of a rescue team? Don't forget how we ended up getting caught in the first place," the older man, Oscar, replied. The younger man shuddered, goosebumps rising as he recalled their earlier ordeal. That thick-lipped man had posted on the official shelter website, claiming to be part of a rescue team. He invited anyone in need of help to contact him. Overjoyed, they had reached out, only to be captured and tied up in that room, meant to be fed to zombies. Then, if he wasn't with the rescue team, why did he let us go? The younger man asked nervously. "How should I know? Just focus on staying alive," Oscar said firmly, his eyes scanning their surroundings. He noticed that there weren't many zombies in the area. As long as they stayed cautious and avoided drawing attention, they might just make it out. If they could get out of the city and into the sparsely populated outskirts, their chances of reaching a shelter would improve significantly. "If only we had a heavy-duty truck," Oscar muttered under his breath. But just as he spoke, his foot landed with a squelch. "Ugh. Gross. What the hell? That's a huge pile of rat crap. Disgusting." Before he could complain further, a strange black mist began to creep across the desolate street, spreading like a living shadow and enveloping everything around them. It wasn't just mist. It felt like a psychic field, something that could invade the mind. "It's here," Ethan murmured from the balcony above. He could feel the presence now. The energy was strong, capable of influencing thoughts and emotions. If it continued to evolve, it might even develop the power of an absolute domain, a terrifying ability that could dominate an entire area. So, there was something lurking in this part of the city. And it wasn't weak. Ethan's curiosity was piqued. He wanted to see what it was. Down on the street, Oscar and the younger man, Liam, were completely unaware of the danger. They continued walking, their bodies now shrouded in the black mist. "Man, I'm starving. Let's eat something," Liam suddenly said. Oscar frowned. "Are you out of your mind? Eating out here? Do you have a death wish? But, isn't this a restaurant?" Liam said, his voice distant and strange. "What the hell are you talking about?" Oscar snapped, turning to glare at him. But then he noticed something was off. Liam's eyes had a vacant, glassy look, and a strange smile was spreading across his face, as if he were in a trance. "Liam, what's wrong with you? Snap out of it," Oscar shouted, shaking him. He. So much food. So delicious," Liam giggled, his voice eerie and childlike. Oscar's heart sank. Something was definitely wrong. In the apocalypse, there were plenty of monsters with bizarre abilities. Could this be the work of a phantom infected? At Novelban at. As the thought crossed his mind, he suddenly saw a figure up ahead. A little old lady, her face warm and familiar. She was holding a steaming plate of apple pie and calling out to him. "Son, come eat. I made your favorite." "Mom," Oscar whispered, his voice trembling. His eyes glazed over, and a wave of longing washed over him. It had been over a decade since his mother passed, but the sight of her now, so kind and loving, was irresistible. "Come on, have some apple pie." It's delicious, she said, smiling warmly. Oscar's face lit up with childlike joy. He took the plate from her hands, the overwhelming hunger in his stomach driving him to devour it greedily. Meanwhile, Liam was having his own hallucination. He saw a grand restaurant, its tables overflowing with gourmet dishes. He was seated inside, holding a massive tomahawk steak, tearing into it with wild abandon. But from Ethan's vantage point on the balcony, the reality was far more horrifying. What he saw wasn't a man eating apple pie or steak. Instead, the two men were standing in the middle of the street, their arms wrapped around each other, savagely biting and tearing into each other's flesh. Blood dripped down their bodies as they clawed and gnawed at one another, their faces twisted in grotesque ecstasy. Ethan's expression remained calm, but his eyes gleamed with intrigue. Interesting. C-36 Screech. Well, that's definitely a creepy ability. Ethan stared silently, unsure where the real culprit was. Hiding. On the street, two people were tearing into each other, biting and clawing like rabid animals. Blood poured freely, their life force fading with every second. It didn't take long before both collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Two living, breathing humans had just killed each other with their bare teeth. If an ordinary person had witnessed this horrifying scene, they'd probably be scared out of their mind. Just then, a shadow emerged from a sewer grate by the side of the street. It was pitch black, and its high-pitched squeals echoed with excitement as it scurried toward the two corpses. It was a rat, but not just any rat. It was massive, the size of a large dog, with thick, jet-black fur and two front teeth sharper than daggers. The creature wasted no time. It sank its teeth into the corpses, tearing into their flesh with a grotesque enthusiasm, devouring them in large, bloody chunks. Clearly, this rat was the mastermind behind the carnage. A mutated beast with a crystal core, it had the ability to manipulate human minds. It wasn't just any rat. It was the Rat King, the ruler of this area. I wonder what a mutated beast's crystal core tastes like, Ethan muttered to himself. The last time he hunted, he'd taken down a two-headed wolf. That beast was still in the neurocore stage, but even then, its meat had tasted pretty good. Now, Ethan couldn't help but feel tempted by the thought of claiming the Rat King's crystal core for himself. The Rat King, however, wasn't oblivious. Even as it feasted, its heightened senses picked up on something. It could feel someone watching it. It froze mid-bite, then slowly turned its head. Sure enough, perched on a high-rise building in the distance was a human figure. Oh, looks like I've been spotted, Ethan said, raising an eyebrow. Man and beast locked eyes, even though they were separated by hundreds of feet. For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. The Rat King's crimson eyes glowed with a violent, bloodthirsty light. It let out a series of sharp, angry squeals, its body radiating a faint black mist that began drifting toward Ethan. The mist was a psychic attack, its range vast and deadly. But compared to Ethan's domain of the dead, it was laughably weak. Ethan's eyes glimmered with a faint red light as he activated his absolute domain. The domain of the dead expanded outward, enveloping the area around him. The black mist disintegrated instantly, like snow melting under the sun. It couldn't even get close to him. The Rat King's nose twitched nervously. It was clearly shaken. Its gaze remained fixed on Ethan, who stood atop the building like a king surveying his domain. The Rat King could feel it, a suffocating pressure, as if it were staring at a predator far beyond its comprehension. Rats, by nature, are highly sensitive to danger. They can sense earthquakes, tsunamis, and other natural disasters long before they strike. And right now, this Rat King could feel death creeping closer and closer. Abandoning the corpses, it turned and bolted. Trying to run, Ethan smirked. In one fluid motion, he leapt from the building, landing on the street below. His movements were swift and ghost-like, covering dozens of feet in the blink of an eye. The distance between them, once hundreds of feet, vanished in mere moments. The Rat King let out a piercing screech, its voice sharp enough to make the air tremble. Screech. The sound echoed through the streets, carrying with it an eerie, commanding tone. Ethan suddenly heard a rustling noise beneath his feet. From the sewers, the sound grew louder and louder, until... whoosh! A swarm of rats erupted from the ground like a black fountain, pouring out of the sewer grates in a writhing, chittering mass. The Rat King had summoned reinforcements. The swarm spread out, filling the streets. Rats of all sizes, some as big as dogs, others as small as cats, came charging from every direction, their eyes glowing with a feral intensity. So, this is how it calls for backup, Ethan muttered, now surrounded by a sea of rats. The swarm surged toward him, a living tide of teeth and claws. Each rat seemed more vicious than the last, their mutated forms brimming with aggression. But Ethan's domain of the dead was unstoppable. Any rat that dared to enter his domain was instantly obliterated. Their bodies exploded like overripe fruit, splattering the ground with gore. The rat swarm was relentless, but around Ethan, there was a vacuum of death. Nothing could get close. Still, the rats showed no fear. They charged forward like moths to a flame, throwing themselves at him without hesitation. Ethan had become a living meat grinder. Chunks of flesh and sprays of blood filled the air around him. In just a few breaths, the ground was piled high with rat corpses, layer upon layer. At nobleman at. Everywhere he looked, there were rats. Ethan's sharp gaze scanned the chaos, searching for the Rat King. But the cunning creature had vanished, blending into the swarm. Its exact location was impossible to pinpoint. This rat's harder to catch than I thought, Ethan muttered, his eyes narrowing. As he surveyed the battlefield, he suddenly spotted a large rat lounging on top of a bus stop. Its eyes were half closed, its tail swaying lazily, and it was staring at him with a smug, almost mocking expression. Still daring to taunt me, huh? Ethan immediately recognized it as the Rat King. Without hesitation, he charged toward it. But the Rat King didn't panic. With a casual leap, it disappeared into a nearby sewer grate, vanishing into the swarm once again. Ethan cursed under his breath. He'd lost sight of it again. Something wasn't right. His domain of the dead could only remain active for about 20 minutes, and 2 minutes had already passed. If this dragged on, his chances of success would drop significantly. As Ethan weighed his options, the Rat King reappeared. This time, it was perched on the roof of a wrecked carport, staring at him with the same infuriatingly smug expression. Ethan lunged toward it again. But, just like before, the Rat King slipped away at the last second, disappearing into the shadows. Meanwhile, the endless tide of rats continued to surge toward Ethan, wave after wave. It was clear now, the Rat King wasn't trying to fight him. It was trying to wear him down. Ethan's mind raced. Should he just give up? If his domain of the dead ran out, the rats would swarm him. While his body was strong enough to withstand their sharp teeth, the thought of being covered in filthy sewer rats made his skin crawl. And without the domain's protection, hunting the Rat King would become even harder. Even with my abilities, there's no guarantee I'll succeed in taking it down, Ethan thought to himself. But just as he was about to retreat, the Rat King appeared again. This time, it was perched on a trash can, its eyes half closed as it stared at him with that same infuriatingly smug look. Ethan clenched his fists, but he didn't move. He wasn't going to fall for the same trick again. Instead, he decided to use the remaining time on his domain of the dead to escape the area. He could always come back later to deal with the Rat King when the odds were more in his favor. But just as he was about to leave, something unexpected happened. The bright sky suddenly darkened, as if a massive shadow had fallen over the area. Caw, 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 a piercing cry echoed through the air. Ethan looked up, startled. Far above, a massive black shape loomed, and the sound of flapping wings filled the sky. Among the cacophony of caws, a strange, almost human-like voice rang out. Hello, good man. Oh, Ethan raised an eyebrow, glancing upward. It was a large crow, the same one he'd fed before. The bird circled above him, its crimson eyes gleaming with a fierce, predatory light. It had come to help. The red-eyed crow let out a sharp, ear-splitting screech, and suddenly, the sky was filled with thousands of crows. The flock descended like a black storm, diving toward the rat swarm below. Each crow was like a missile, plummeting toward the ground with deadly precision. Their razor-sharp beaks pierced through the rats with ease, killing them instantly. The tide of rats was halted. The crows tore through the swarm, their numbers overwhelming the rodents. The Rat King, still perched on the trash can, watched in disbelief. Its once relaxed demeanor was gone, replaced by twitching nostrils and a look of pure rage. It was furious. C-37A1 star difficulty hunt. It never expected that a flock of crows would come to help this human. A strong sense of danger surged again. Sensing that the situation was turning bad, the giant rat decided it was time to leave. It quickly tried to make its escape, preparing to leap into the sewer. But before it could, the sound of rushing wind filled the air. Several crows dove down, surrounding it. One of them slammed heavily into the rat, sending it flying dozens of feet away. Ethan glanced over, his eyes narrowing. He knew this was his chance. These crows are the real deal. When it matters, they really show up, he muttered. He leapt into the air, pushing his absolute domain to its limit. Every rat caught within its range exploded into pieces. The Rat King, now panicked, tried to flee. But suddenly, it felt an overwhelming pressure bearing down on it. Its body froze. It couldn't move at all. Looking up, it saw a tall figure standing before it. Ethan's gaze was cold, filled with murderous intent. The Rat King, now trapped within the absolute domain, had lost all its arrogance. Its body trembled uncontrollably. Its eyes, surprisingly, showed a hint of pleading, as if begging for mercy. It almost looked pitiful. Ethan focused his thoughts, concentrating the pressure of the absolute domain into a single point. With a loud bang, the Rat King's body exploded into pieces. A crystal core shot out from the remains, and Ethan caught it in his hand. The moment the Rat King died, the once ferocious swarm of rats lost their leader. Chaos broke out among them as they screeched in panic and scattered in all directions. The massive horde of rats, which had been like a tidal wave moments ago, now retreated just as quickly. At nobleman at. In no time at all, they were gone. The street was left in ruins, littered with shredded rat corpses and chunks of flesh. The stench of blood hung thick in the air. A flock of large crows landed on the ground, pecking at the remains. Goodbye, kind human. The lead crow circled Ethan a few times before flapping its wings and flying off with the rest of the flock. And with that, the street fell silent once more. Ethan watched the crows disappear into the distance. He couldn't help but feel that this was karma, good deeds being repaid. Maybe he should start feeding small animals more often and try to be a good person. He glanced around. While the Rat King on this street had been dealt with, there were likely other threats lurking in the surrounding areas. After all, the Rat King wasn't the true ruler of this place. The real overlord here was probably a zombie king. Ethan decided not to push his luck. With 2 crystal cores in hand, he had enough to absorb for a while. It was time to head back to his base and lay low for a bit. With that, his figure vanished as he activated his stealth ability and returned to his territory. But not long after Ethan left, a group of zombies appeared on the blood-soaked street. Leading them was a zombie king with dark red skin and bulging black veins. It was the infamous red-faced zombie king from the park. Around its neck was something furry and pitch black. As it raised its head, the creature revealed a human-like face covered in black fur. Squeak. Squeak squeak squeak. The human-faced rat jumped down from the zombie king's neck and scurried over to the pile of rat corpses. It let out a mournful cry, filled with sorrow. My wife. How could you die? Who did this to you? I'll avenge you, no matter what. The human-faced rat rubbed its grotesque face against the shredded remains of the Rat King, its voice trembling with grief. Before long, its fur was soaked in blood. Scarf, don't be too upset. Anyone who dares invade my territory, I'll make sure they pay with their life. The red-faced zombie king's voice was hoarse, like the sound of grinding stones. Behind it stood several trusted subordinates, all highly evolved. Their intelligence was on par with beings like Bulldozer and Laura, showing signs of advanced thought. Boss, I asked around. It was that zombie from the tower who did this, one of the subordinates reported. Oh, the red-faced zombie king's eyes gleamed with murderous intent. It had already been planning to eliminate that rival to expand its territory, but now the provocation had come straight to its doorstep. How many zombies does he have over there? After some scouting, we've figured it out. About 2,000, the subordinate replied. Only 2,000. The red-faced zombie king tilted its head, finding it hard to believe. It had expected the rival to be much stronger. After all, under its own command, it had already gathered over 20,000 zombies. 20,000 against 2,000. That would be a walk in the park. Scarf, get ready. I'll avenge you right away. Meanwhile, Ethan had no idea any of this was happening. He had already returned home. As usual, he started his routine, soaking in a hot bath, changing into clean clothes, and then beginning to absorb the energy from the crystal cores he had collected. The Rat King's crystal core was pitch black, like a perfectly ripened cherry, and it gave off a faint, sweet aroma. The energy within it was incredibly pure, providing a significant boost to Ethan's abilities. Perhaps it was because the Rat King's mental field had some similarities to his domain of the dead, making the energy particularly compatible with him. Over the next few days, Ethan stayed low at home, sticking to his usual cautious approach. Since taking down the Rat King, neither rats nor zombies had come to bother him. Occasionally, a crow would circle in the sky above, but that was the only sign of life. During this time, Ethan used his phone to gather information about the outside world. The Genesis Biotech website was especially lively. The incident at the mall had been made public. Several awakeners had been killed, and billions worth of supplies had vanished. The survivor forums were buzzing with speculation. Over 10 awakeners wiped out in a single night. What kind of monster could have done this? Yeah, what level of zombie king are we even talking about here? It's terrifying. And on top of that, over 200 survivors were involved, and all the supplies were looted. Genesis Biotech isn't as reliable as they claim. They were hyping up their Operation King Hunt, but it looks like they got hunted instead. Could it be that it wasn't zombies, but another human group that did this? That's possible. I've heard rumors about rogue awakener groups out there, doing all kinds of terrible things, even raiding official shelter supplies. Quote. The Westfield Century City Mall incident had become a tangled mystery, leaving everyone curious about what really happened that night. But there were no survivors left to tell the tale. It was quickly becoming the greatest unsolved mystery of the apocalypse. Still, Genesis Biotech wasn't ready to give up. The billions worth of supplies were far too valuable to simply vanish without explanation. There was no way they'd let it go. They immediately issued a public statement. Our company is committed to uncovering the truth behind the mall incident and honoring the memory of Marcus and the others who gave their lives. Effective immediately, Operation King Hunt will commence. We will hunt down every zombie king and recover the lost supplies. Ethan, lounging at home, muttered to himself as he read the statement on his phone. These people just can't stay out of trouble, can they? Meanwhile, at Genesis Biotech, preparations for the operation were in full swing. A group of awakeners sat in a conference room, their attention fixed on a large screen at the front. The screen displayed a detailed map of Los Angeles. A middle-aged man stood at the front, pointing to the map as he explained. After a month of drone reconnaissance, we've mapped out the basic distribution of zombies. In the area surrounding the mall, there are roughly 10 zombie king territories. Based on their threat levels, we've classified them from 1-star to 5-star difficulty. 5-star zones are the most dangerous, while 1-star zones are relatively safer. For example, this area near the tower. He circled a spot on the map with a laser pointer. This territory has about 2,000 zombies, making it the smallest of the Zombie King territories. We've classified it as a 1-star difficulty hunt. The awakeners in the room exchanged glances, feeling like this was starting to resemble a video game dungeon raid. Still, a 1-star difficulty hunt sounded like an easy job. Immediately, hands shot up as people scrambled to volunteer. This one's perfect for me. I'll take it. No, I'll go. Let me handle it. C-38. The battle is imminent. At the back of the conference room sat a middle-aged man named Nathan Carter, the person in charge here. Watching his team of awakeners act so spinelessly, he couldn't help but feel a surge of frustration. After all, only by hunting down powerful zombie kings could they evolve and grow stronger. But instead, they were slacking off, choosing missions with the lowest difficulty. Still, maybe it wasn't all bad. If this operation went smoothly, it could boost morale, enhance the company's reputation, and earn the trust of the survivors. Meanwhile, Ethan was still lounging at home, sipping a crimson liquid from a wine glass. His posture was elegant, his life leisurely. Outside the building, a red-eyed crow circled a few times in the air before landing on a street lamp. A little black bird. In a nearby alley, Bulldozer peeked out, his massive head half visible as he observed the scene. He was fiercely territorial. He'd noticed this crow hanging around the area for a while now. And, being a bit of a mischievous brute, he'd decided he was going to catch it. So, Bulldozer began creeping toward the crow, moving as quietly as possible. He tiptoed like a cat, his steps light and deliberate, not making a single sound. Because he was being so cautious, it took him a full 5 minutes to cover just 50 feet. But he was secretly pleased with himself. The crow didn't seem to notice him at all. It stayed perched on the street lamp, showing no signs of flying away. Now, Bulldozer was less than 30 feet away. He bent his knees slowly, gathering all his strength, and then leapt into the air. Gotcha. At Nobleman at. Bulldozer's jump was so powerful it cracked the ground beneath him. He shot toward the crow like a cannonball, his massive hand reaching out to grab it. But just as he was about to succeed, the crow suddenly flapped its wings and shot straight up, putting some distance between them and narrowly avoiding Bulldozer's grasp. Can't catch me. Can't catch me. The crow's unique, mocking voice echoed from above, its tone both smug and taunting. Roar. Bulldozer let out an angry bellow, furious. He grabbed a manhole cover from the side of the road, swung his arm back, and hurled it at the crow. But the crow was quick. It flapped its wings again, flying even higher. Can't hit me. Can't hit me. Rah, you little black bird, come down here if you've got the guts. Bulldozer roared, realizing he couldn't reach it anymore. The crow ignored him completely. Instead, it flapped its wings and flew higher, eventually disappearing into the distance. Damn it! Damn it! Bulldozer stomped and pounded his chest in frustration, but there was nothing more he could do. The crow soared up to the 20th floor of a building and landed on a metal railing. Inside the spotless, pristine apartment, Ethan was lounging comfortably. Hello, good man. Hello, good man. Well, if it isn't Buddy Crow. Ethan glanced over. He recognized the big crow immediately. If it hadn't helped him hunt the mutant Rat King, things would have been much harder for him. He owed Buddy Crow a reward. Ethan, ever generous, opened the window and pulled a few large drumsticks out of his spatial storage ring, tossing them out. The big crow gobbled them up one by one, as if they were candy. Thank you, good man. Thank you, good man. No problem. Leaning on the windowsill, Ethan continued chatting casually. What brings you here today? Got some free time to visit me. Someone's coming. Zombies too. A big group. The crow squawked. Apparently, it had spotted something while flying overhead and had come to warn Ethan. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Hearing the news didn't surprise him much. He'd made plenty of enemies recently. It was only a matter of time before they came looking for trouble. If they dared to come after him, he'd make sure they learned the true meaning of pain. It was perfect timing, really. He'd just finished absorbing the 2 crystal cores from his last hunt and was wondering where to find more. Now, someone was delivering them right to his doorstep. Still, he couldn't afford to be careless. He needed to prepare for battle. Ethan quickly sent out a signal to his crew, letting them know that intruders were on their way to attack their territory. When Bulldozer heard that someone was invading their territory, he completely lost it. He was already furious from his failed attempt to catch the crow, and now this. It was the last straw. Roar. His deafening roar echoed through the area, and in response, a chorus of guttural growls erupted all around him. One by one, his elite zombie underlings emerged from the shadows. Normally, zombies were sluggish during the day, but now they were brimming with energy. Their bloodshot eyes gleamed with a savage hunger, their ferocity palpable, radiating an overwhelming killing intent. Invading their territory. Were these fools asking to die? 2,000 elite zombies assembled, their sheer numbers creating a terrifying spectacle. At the forefront of the horde stood Bulldozer, Laura, and the PhD zombie, 3 of the most powerful lieutenants in the area. The zombies were ready, their ranks tight and disciplined, prepared to unleash a blood-soaked massacre. Laura, meanwhile, let out a creepy, high-pitched giggle. Unlike Bulldozer, she wasn't angry about the invasion. In fact, she seemed thrilled, as if the whole thing was some kind of twisted game. Her thirst for carnage was even greater than Bulldozer's. She lived for this. Ethan, on the other hand, had taken up a position on the rooftop of the building. The wind whipped through his hair as he stood there, his sharp eyes fixed on the horizon. His calm yet commanding presence exuded an air of quiet confidence. In the distance, faint black dots appeared on the skyline, rapidly approaching. They were Genesis Biotech's aerial reconnaissance drones. On the streets below, a convoy of heavily modified armored vehicles rumbled forward. Leading the charge was a massive bulldozer, plowing through everything in its path. Abandoned cars, stray zombies, nothing could stand in its way. This was Genesis Biotech's Operation King Hunt team. The squad was made up of 10 awakeners, 4 of whom had already condensed crystal cores, along with a 500-strong armed force. The soldiers were fully equipped, carrying high-powered firearms and wearing sleek black nano combat suits. Each suit bore the red Genesis Biotech logo on the chest, giving them a high-tech, almost futuristic look. These nano combat suits were no joke. They were tough enough to withstand zombie claws and bites, and even a knife couldn't pierce them. They were incredibly effective in close combat. But that wasn't all. Genesis Biotech had also brought along 2 bioengineered weapons, Doom Hunters, to bolster their firepower. Inside one of the vehicles sat the 4 Crystal Core Awakeners, the main force of this operation. 3 men and 1 woman, they were the team's heavy hitters. This mission's a sweet deal. Lucky we got assigned to it, one of the men said with a smug grin. The woman nodded. A 1-star zombie nest. Perfect for some training. This is my first time on a mission like this. Ha ha ha. Then you'd better watch closely and learn, the man replied, clearly enjoying his role as the experienced veteran. Their team leader, Michael Morgan, cut in with a warning. Evan, even a lion uses its full strength to hunt a rabbit. Don't get cocky. Every zombie is dangerous. Captain, it's just 2,000 zombies, Evan said with a shrug. And the zombie king here probably doesn't have any special abilities, just brute strength. If it were anything more, it'd have a bigger territory than this. The last man, a tall and imposing figure, chimed in. As long as we don't run into a phantom infected, we'll be fine. Purely physical zombies are the easiest to deal with. Oh. The woman listened intently as the three men discussed tactics. It was her first mission, and she was quickly realizing there was a lot more to hunting zombies than she'd thought. She made a mental note to learn as much as she could from her more experienced teammates. C-39 What the hell is going on? Aside from the Operation King Hunt squad, another force was also converging on the area. It was none other than the red-faced zombie king from the Park District. Wearing its signature scarf, it was here to avenge the mutant Rat King, take out Ethan, and claim his territory in the process. The red-faced zombie king didn't come alone, it brought an army. A massive horde of 20,000 zombies surged forward like a dark, unstoppable tide. Their roars filled the air as they charged, a terrifying flood of death. Leading the pack were over 100 elite, agile zombies, leaping and bounding like crazed monkeys. Mixed into the horde were countless mutated giant rats, their glowing red eyes brimming with ferocity. The sight of 20,000 zombies flooding the streets was nothing short of awe-inspiring. At the back of the horde, the red-faced zombie king strolled leisurely with a few of its trusted lieutenants. It didn't think it would need to lift a finger. 2,000 zombies on Ethan's side versus its 20,000. The outcome was a foregone conclusion. Boss, this fight's gonna be over in no time. You can just show up at the end and collect the crystal cores, one of its lieutenants said. The red-faced zombie king nodded approvingly. It liked the sound of that. Meanwhile, the Operation King Hunt squad had reached their target location. Armed personnel began systematically taking out the scattered zombies on the outskirts. Gunfire echoed through the streets, and zombies dropped one after another. Michael and the other three awakeners stepped out of their vehicle, scanning the area. Stray zombies emerged from alleyways and side streets, but they didn't even get close before being gunned down. There was no need to worry about them. Their attention shifted toward the building ahead. In the middle of the road stood a towering figure. It was none other than the raging bulldozer. Roar. Bulldozer had caught the scent of humans and let out an earth-shaking roar in their direction. Its fury was palpable. If Ethan hadn't ordered it to hold back, it would have already charged forward, eager to tear them apart. Looks like a strength zombie king, Evan observed, his tone calm. Judging by how clumsy it looks, it probably doesn't have any special abilities. Yeah, Michael nodded. But we should still be cautious. There might be other zombie kings around. Look at the horde behind it. They seem pretty evolved. This is terrifying. The only female awakener in the group gasped, her voice trembling. It was her first mission, and she couldn't hide her fear. Evan, ever the gentleman, tried to reassure her. Don't worry. It's just a one-star zombie nest. Only about 2,000 zombies, and they're not packed too tightly. We'll clear them out in no time. Yeah, let's wrap this up quickly and get our reward. I haven't eaten properly in days, grumbled the last member of the team, a tall, burly man. Even with Genesis Biotech's advanced technology, food was still in short supply. As the Operation King Hunt squad moved forward, the tension in the air grew thicker. The two forces were closing in on each other, the atmosphere charged like a powder keg ready to explode. Bulldozer stood at the front, exuding an aura of raw power. It looked like a one-man army, ready to take on anything. Its massive fists were clenched, muscles bulging grotesquely, and its eyes burned with murderous intent. It was just waiting for Ethan's command to charge forward and rip those humans to shreds. Laura, another of Ethan's lieutenants, had stopped smiling. She tilted her head, staring intently at the humans ahead. Her fingers twitched with anticipation. What's taking the boss so long to give the order? She was itching to kill. The zombies grew restless, their roars echoing through the streets. But Ethan remained silent, unmoving. The humans were now less than 1,500 feet away, close enough to almost be within firing range. What's the boss doing? Did he wander off to find something to eat and forget about us? Bulldozer muttered impatiently, glancing back at the others. The PhD zombie shot him a withering look. Idiot. Do you think the boss is as brainless as you? No orders mean we wait. Wait. They're practically gonna roll their trucks right over my face. Laura growled, clawing at her hair in frustration. She was on the verge of snapping. But just as the Operation King Hunt squad advanced another 30 feet, they came to a halt as well. Captain Michael narrowed his eyes, carefully, observing the scene ahead. These zombies, something's off about them. What do you mean, Captain? Evan stepped forward, curious. Michael stared ahead, his tone serious. If these were normal zombies, they'd have charged at us the moment we showed up. But they're just standing there, not moving. That's true, the female awakener chimed in, nodding. These zombies don't act like the ones I've seen before. The tall man in the group agreed as well. When zombies behave like this, it usually means there's a high intelligence zombie controlling them, Michael added. Added Nobleman at. Or, maybe they're just dumb, Evan suggested with a shrug. Maybe they don't want to leave their territory. The four of them stayed on the outskirts, observing and debating their next move. None of them dared to advance, and the standoff dragged on for several minutes. The tall man finally broke the silence. What if it's a trap? PFF'd. A trap? You think zombies are smart enough to set traps? Evan couldn't help but laugh. Michael thought about it for a moment. It did seem unlikely. They were already here, and no matter what was going on with these zombies, their mission was to wipe them out. 2,000 zombies, that's all. Even if something unexpected happens, we can handle it. Let's get this over with, Michael said decisively. Got it, Evan replied eagerly, clearly itching to fight. The rest of the team took a deep breath, their expressions hardening as they prepared for the oncoming horde. But just as the tension reached its peak, the ground suddenly began to rumble. A low, thunderous sound echoed through the streets, accompanied by chaotic footsteps, guttural roars, and high-pitched squeals. The noise came from all directions. Something's wrong. Michael's brow furrowed, his face darkening instantly. The armed personnel exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't need to say anything, they all recognized the sound. They'd been through this before. This was the sound of a massive zombie horde. And sure enough, it began. First, a few agile zombies leapt onto the rooftops around them, crouching on all fours like predators, their glowing eyes locked onto the humans below. Then, from every street corner and alleyway, an endless wave of zombies poured out, accompanied by swarms of mutated giant rats. Where the hell did all these zombies come from? Michael and the others were stunned. The sheer number of zombies far exceeded the 2,000 they'd been expecting. It was overwhelming, and they could only assume they'd walked straight into an ambush. What do we do now? The female awakener asked nervously, her voice trembling. The others looked grim. No one had a clear plan. Michael scanned their surroundings, his jaw tightening. We don't have a choice. Get ready to fight. The zombies charged forward, their speed terrifying. In the blink of an eye, they were upon them. Open fire. Michael shouted. The sound of gunfire erupted, deafening and relentless. The 500 armed personnel formed a tight formation, their firepower concentrated and devastating. Zombies fell in droves, mowed down like wheat under a scythe. But the horde was relentless. They kept coming, trampling over the bodies of their fallen, some even rolling forward after being knocked down. They didn't care about pain or death, they only cared about reaching their prey. The most dangerous among them were the elite agile zombies. They leapt from rooftops with incredible speed, catching the soldiers off guard. In an instant, they'd pounce on their targets, pinning them to the ground and tearing into them with razor-sharp claws and teeth. These elite zombies were too fast and too strong for the regular soldiers to handle. Only Michael and the other awakeners could deal with them. But then, something even worse happened. The concrete beneath their feet began to crack. High-pitched squeals echoed from below as mutated rats burst out of the ground. The rats swarmed the soldiers, climbing up their bodies and sinking their teeth into exposed flesh. Some went straight for their ankles, biting down hard and causing the soldiers to scream in agony. The battlefield descended into chaos. Gunfire, roars, and screams filled the air as the two sides clashed in a brutal, bloody melee. The soldiers fought desperately, but the sheer ferocity of the zombie horde and the swarming rats made it clear this was no ordinary fight. Not far away, Bulldozer and Laura stood watching the carnage unfold. For once, they weren't in a hurry to join the fight. Instead, they just stared at the scene in confusion. What the hell is going on? C40 cheers. Seriously. This is supposed to be my turf, so why are those two groups fighting each other up front? Bulldozer scratched his head, confused. Wait a second. Don't tell me they came to my territory just to settle their own beef. Meanwhile, Ethan stood tall on the rooftop, his lean figure silhouetted against the sky. He'd already noticed earlier that a massive horde of zombies was heading this way, so he'd told his crew to hold back and not get involved. Now, with the two factions going at it like there's no tomorrow, Ethan decided to just sit back and enjoy the show. Go on, give it your best shot. He even cheered them on in his head, secretly hoping they'd tear each other apart. A red-eyed crow circled around Ethan, its raspy voice breaking the moment. Hey, good guy, good guy. When's dinner at your place? Don't rush me. The water in the pot isn't even boiling yet, Ethan replied without even turning around. Turns out, Buddy Crow had shown up just in time for dinner, hoping to mooch a meal. In the distance, the battlefield was pure chaos. Gunfire echoed through the air, flesh and blood flew everywhere, and severed limbs littered the ground. The stench of blood was overwhelming, turning the place into something straight out of a nightmare. The humans had brought out their trump card. Two 10-foot-tall bioengineered killing machines, Doom Hunters. These hulking monstrosities had broad, muscular builds and grotesque scars running across their massive foreheads, like giant centipedes crawling over their faces. Their bodies were wrapped in ammo belts, and each carried a massive iron hammer strapped to their backs. In their right hands, they wielded Gatling guns, the barrels already spinning as they unleashed a storm of bullets. The 6 rotating barrels roared to life, spitting fire and raining down a relentless hail of bullets. It was a metal storm. Any zombie unlucky enough to get hit was either blown in half or completely obliterated, their remains scattered across the battlefield in gruesome fashion. If an elite zombie managed to get close, the Doom Hunters didn't flinch. They'd simply swing their massive iron hammers in a devastating counterattack. No one knew what material the hammers were made of, but they were unbelievably dense, easily weighing 40 tons. When they struck the ground, they left deep craters, and any zombie caught in the impact zone was instantly reduced to a bloody pulp. Watching the carnage unfold, Ethan couldn't help but be reminded of his childhood. Back then, every Thanksgiving at the orphanage, they'd roast a turkey. His job was to crush ice for the lemonade. Looking at the zombies now, he thought they weren't much different from those ice cubes. The arrival of the Doom Hunters had completely turned the tide in favor of the humans. Even with the overwhelming numbers of the zombie horde, they couldn't break through the line. No wonder these things were considered the ultimate weapon in the zombie eradication program. The only real threat to the humans was the occasional giant rat scurrying out from underground. But even then, the soldiers were equipped with nano-combat suits, which the rats' sharp teeth couldn't penetrate. At most, they'd manage to bite someone, but that was about it. It was clear that Operation King Hunt was no joke. They were a force to be reckoned with. In just 5 minutes, they'd wiped out 6,000 or 7,000 zombies, reducing the once massive horde by a third. And that's when it happened. The red-faced zombie king strolled onto the battlefield, wearing what looked like a scarf around his neck. He moved at a leisurely pace, as if he had all the time in the world. He glanced around, wondering if his minions had already taken over Ethan's territory. But as he squinted at the scene in front of him, something felt off. His minions weren't just fighting humans, they were locked in a full-on battle with them. And those 2 Doom Hunters. They stood out like sore thumbs, smashing zombies left and right with their massive hammers, as if they were crushing ice cubes. To make matters worse, there were human awakeners on the battlefield, individuals with supernatural abilities, tearing through his forces like they were nothing. What the hell is going on here? The zombie king muttered, his voice low and dangerous. One of his elite zombies shuffled over to report. Boss, there are human awakeners here. We've started fighting them. Oh, yeah, no kidding. The zombie king could see that for himself. And what about the zombie king inside that building? Has he come out yet? No idea. Doesn't seem like it. What? The red-faced zombie king's temper flared. The whole point of this operation was to take down the rival zombie king. But now, his forces had suffered heavy losses, and they hadn't even seen their target yet. This was unacceptable. Boss, how come there are human awakeners here? One of the underlings asked from the back. The red-faced zombie king couldn't figure it out either. Sure, he'd evolved enough to gain intelligence, but let's be honest, he wasn't exactly a genius. Could it be that he's working with the humans? Boss, is it possible, another zombie chimed in, that the humans came here to attack him too, but we just ran into them first? The red-faced zombie king's eyes widened. That actually made sense. Wait a second. Did they just screw this whole thing up? Raargh. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got, until he was practically screeching in frustration. At Nobleman at. So, boss, what do we do now? Should we retreat? One of his minions asked cautiously. Retreat. The zombie king's eyes burned with fury. After losing so many of his forces, retreating would only make him feel even more humiliated. They'd already sunk too much into this fight. There was no turning back now. The only way to make up for the losses was to win, no matter the cost. Besides, humans were enemies too. And their crystal cores. Oh, those were even sweeter. There's no way out now. Kill them. Kill them all. Ruah. At his command, the zombies behind him let out deafening howls. If the boss said no retreat, then there was no retreat. Their eyes turned blood red as they charged forward, throwing themselves into the fray. These weren't just any zombies. They were highly evolved, practically on the same level as zombie kings themselves. Their strength was terrifying. Screech. The scarf-like creature on the zombie king's shoulder let out a piercing shriek before leaping off. It hopped and scrambled its way up a nearby building, its body beginning to emit tendrils of black mist. This wasn't just any ordinary zombie. It had a sinister ability: mind control. Wait, is that a zombie king? Michael's brow furrowed as he heard the deafening roars echoing across the battlefield. He'd already guessed that a horde of this size had to be led by a zombie king. Everyone, stay sharp. The real fight is about to begin. Got it. The soldiers around him responded in unison, their voices steady and determined. But the black mist was already creeping toward them, swirling around several of the armed personnel. I'm so hungry. Yeah, me too. Hey, look over there. Look at that. The beach. I wanna go chill by the ocean, crack open a cold beer, and enjoy some oysters. Quote. One of the soldiers, eyes glazed over. He mimed the motion of grabbing a beer, but instead of a drink, his hand reached for the grenade on his belt. Hey, stop. What are you doing? Michael shouted, realizing something was wrong and rushing to intervene. But it was too late. The soldier had already pulled the pin. Cheers. Boom. The grenade exploded, engulfing the soldier in flames and sending shrapnel flying in every direction. The deadly fragments tore through the nearby soldiers, leaving a trail of carnage. These fragmentation grenades were no joke. Their destructive power was immense. But it wasn't over yet. More soldiers, their minds clouded by the black mist, began pulling out their grenades as well. Cheers. They raised their glasses together, and in a horrifying moment of unity, they detonated themselves. Boom, 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 boom. A series of explosions ripped through the battlefield, sending rocks, shrapnel, and debris flying like a deadly storm. The chaos was overwhelming, and the once organized human forces were thrown into disarray. Michael thrust his hands forward. As an Earth-type awakener, he summoned a shield of solid earth that condensed in front of him, forming a thick, sturdy barrier to block the force of the explosion. The rest of the armed team scrambled for cover behind the armored vehicle, shielding themselves from the shrapnel. But even as they avoided physical harm, a creeping sense of dread spread among them. Just moments ago, one of their comrades, someone who had been fighting alongside them, had inexplicably taken their own life. It was chilling. That kind of ability, the power to kill without leaving a trace, was the stuff of nightmares. Michael's brow furrowed deeply. He had already pieced it together. They were under some form of mind control. Evan, activate a mental barrier and locate the enemy, he ordered, his voice steady but tense. Got it. Evan nodded firmly. As a mind-type awakener, Evan closed his eyes for a brief moment. With a single thought, a mental barrier expanded outward, cutting through the oppressive black mist that surrounded them. Within seconds, he pinpointed the source of the attack. There. I found it. Up above. He shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. Everyone followed his gaze and looked up. On the third-floor windowsill of a nearby building, they spotted it. A massive, pitch-black rat crouched there, its fur matted and oily. But what made their stomachs churn was its face. It had the grotesque, hairy face of a human. C-41. Holy crap, he's that strong. Damn it. There really are some freaky monsters out here. But just as the words left his mouth, a zombie leapt from the top of a high-rise, landing squarely on the shoulders of one of the armed soldiers. This wasn't just any zombie. It was one of the red-faced zombie king's top enforcers, the king of agile zombies, nicknamed Monkey. Monkey's body was muscular, covered in grotesque, pus-filled boils. With a swift motion, it wrapped its arms around the soldier's neck and twisted. The sickening crack of bone echoed as the soldier's head was ripped clean off. Attack. Now. Someone shouted. The surrounding soldiers scrambled to retaliate, but Monkey was too fast. With another powerful leap, it landed on the back of the Doom Hunter, a massive, heavily armed mech-like unit designed for zombie extermination. The Doom Hunter staggered under the sudden assault, its movements jerky and unstable. And then it happened. The Gatling gun mounted on its right arm misfired. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat. A hail of bullets sprayed out, tearing through the ranks of the armed personnel. Take cover. Someone screamed. The soldiers dove behind an armored vehicle as bullets ricocheted off its surface, sparks flying everywhere. But not everyone was lucky. A few unlucky souls were caught in the crossfire, their bodies shredded by the gunfire, exploding into bloody chunks. With the arrival of the zombie elites, the tide of battle was turning against the humans. And then, the red-faced zombie king made its move. Raising one grotesque arm, its muscles swelled to an unnatural size, veins bulging and writhing like living snakes. Those veins shot out, snaking through the air and wrapping around several soldiers. The veins pierced their bodies. Arg! The soldiers screamed in agony as their bodies shriveled up, their blood drained in seconds. What was left of them collapsed to the ground, nothing more than dried-out husks. So strong. Michael muttered, his sharp eyes fixed on the red-faced zombie king. Its grotesque attack reminded him of a movie he'd seen, Venom. Still, he thought, at least this ability wasn't completely out of the ordinary. It was horrifying, sure, but it didn't qualify as something from the phantom-infected category. Not yet. As the red-faced zombie king's veins lashed out, claiming more lives, Michael stomped his foot hard against the ground. In an instant, several oval-shaped earthen walls erupted from the ground, forming a barrier that blocked the king's attacks. Captain. The horde's breaking through. Someone shouted from nearby. Without the suppressive fire from the Doom Hunter, the massive zombie horde was surging forward, closing the gap. I know. Michael snapped, glancing over his shoulder. This whole situation felt like a twisted game of whack-a-mole. No matter how many zombies they took down, more just kept coming. He was barely keeping up. But then, one of their heavy hitters stepped forward. Xander. A towering man with a commanding presence, Xander was an awakener with lightning-based powers. His body crackled with electricity, arcs of lightning dancing across his skin. Even his hair stood on end, charged with raw energy. The air around him grew heavy with power, the tension almost suffocating. At nobleman at. Die. Xander roared, slamming his fist into the ground. Boom. The earth cracked like a spiderweb, lightning surging outward in all directions. Within a 60-foot radius, the ground was engulfed in a storm of electricity. Zombies caught in the blast convulsed violently, smoke rising from their charred bodies as they were reduced to ash. Captain, this isn't sustainable. Xander called out, turning back to Michael. We're gonna get worn down at this rate. Awakeners were powerful, but their energy wasn't limitless. Xander, along with the other key fighters, was already showing signs of exhaustion. Their faces were pale, their movements slower. They were running on fumes. Michael clenched his jaw. Yeah, I know. These zombies didn't just show up out of nowhere. They're from somewhere else, and their strength is on par with a 3-star zombie nest. He had already pieced it together. Something bigger was at play here. Wah! What the hell? The female awakener's face turned pale as a sheet. She hadn't expected her first mission to turn into this kind of nightmare. Why are they even here? She stammered. How the hell should I know? Michael snapped, his frustration boiling over. The zombies from the 1-star nest haven't even shown up yet. Quote. The group fell into an uneasy silence. They'd been thrown into a crisis out of nowhere, and to make matters worse, their actual mission target, the 1-star zombie nest, was still untouched. Not even a scratch. Well, if there's a silver lining, Michael said, trying to keep his composure, it's that the zombies from the 1-star nest staying put makes it easier for us to break through. Yeah, the others nodded in agreement. Things were bad enough already. If those zombies joined the fight, they'd be completely screwed. Evan tried to lighten the mood. Relax, everyone. Those zombies are dumb as bricks. We're practically knocking on their front door, and they're still not moving. They're probably not coming out. Meanwhile, on a rooftop overlooking the battlefield, Ethan stood with a calm, almost leisurely expression. Around him perched a flock of crows, buddy crows, as they were called, waiting for scraps like freeloaders. Thanks for waiting, everyone, Ethan said, his voice low and smooth. As the water boiling yet? One of the crows asked, its eyes glowing red with excitement. It is, Ethan replied with a nod. Down below, the battlefield was in chaos. The armed personnel were running low on ammo, and the awakeners were visibly exhausted, their energy nearly depleted. The once massive horde of 20,000 zombies had been reduced to a ragged, scattered few. It's our turn now, Ethan said, his voice carrying a chilling finality. At his command, the thousands of zombies still standing suddenly roared to life, their bloodlust filling the air. Roar. Leading the charge was Bulldozer, a hulking brute of a zombie. With a thunderous roar, he barreled forward like a runaway freight train, his massive footsteps shaking the ground. Behind him, the elite zombies surged forward like a pack of wild animals unleashed from their chains. But the most eager of them all was Laura. The moment Ethan gave the order, she could barely contain herself. She'd been itching to join the slaughter, her bloodlust simmering as she watched the carnage unfold earlier. Now, she was ready to play with the humans. Hey tilde. Laura's grin stretched unnaturally wide, almost splitting her face in two. With a flash of movement, her figure blurred, vanishing like a shadow as she darted toward the battlefield. Above, the rooftop erupted into chaos as the crows took flight, their black wings blotting out the sky. In the center of the swirling flock stood Ethan, his cold, sharp gaze fixed on the battlefield below. His crimson eyes glowed briefly, and then, in an instant, he vanished. Bulldozer was the first to crash into the battlefield. His massive frame plowed through the remaining zombies like a wrecking ball, sending bodies flying in every direction. Some zombies were even impaled on streetlights, left dangling like grotesque ornaments. With his sheer brute force, Bulldozer tore a gaping hole through the zombie horde. Behind him, the elite zombies moved with terrifying precision, pouncing on their prey. Their razor-sharp teeth tore through flesh and bone, snapping necks with ease. After tossing aside the severed heads of their victims, they immediately moved on to their next targets. Wait, what the hell is that? Michael and the others had felt the tremors before they saw it. Turning toward the source, they spotted the massive figure of Bulldozer tearing through the battlefield, heading straight for their position. Shit. They're coming out. Michael shouted, his voice tinged with panic. The group's faces went pale. The female awakener's voice trembled. Evan, didn't you say they wouldn't come out? I. Evan stammered, completely at a loss for words. The situation had turned on him so fast, he didn't even know how to respond. Was this just bad luck? Or something worse? The team's already dire situation had just gone from bad to worse. But as they quickly realized, this wasn't just worse. This was a whole new level of disaster. Bulldozer's massive frame was now barreling toward the human defenses. The ground shook violently with each step, the sheer force of his charge sending shockwaves through the air. His presence alone was overwhelming, a terrifying display of raw power. We have to stop him. Michael shouted, snapping the team out of their daze. The armed personnel opened fire, their bullets pelting Bulldozer's thick, leathery hide. But it was no use. His skin was like armor, and the bullets barely left a scratch. If anything, the onslaught only seemed to make him angrier. He roared and picked up speed, charging even faster. Let me handle this, the female awakener said, her brow furrowing in concentration. Her ability was metal manipulation, and with a wave of her hand, she sent a heavy armored vehicle skidding into Bulldozer's path. Boom. The collision was deafening. The armored vehicle was sent spinning through the air like a toy, flipping several times before crashing far off in the distance. The team stared in shock. Holy crap, he's that strong. C-42, the true king, had arrived. The zombie was unbelievably strong, like a humanoid beast straight out of a nightmare. Even so, the weight of the armored vehicle managed to slow Bulldozer down a little. But before anyone could breathe a sigh of relief, a slender figure appeared behind Bulldozer. Her face twisted into a sinister smile, terrifying to behold, as she charged forward at an inhuman speed. Laura had evolved significantly. She had already formed a crystal core and awakened her ability, Phantom Dash. When her speed reached a critical threshold, she could enter a state of invisibility. This eerie ability allowed her to approach her targets without a sound, completely undetected. One of the armed soldiers was firing ahead, his focus locked on the charging zombie. But as the female zombie closed the distance, her speed increased dramatically. In the blink of an eye, she vanished. Where'd she go? The soldier froze, his target suddenly gone. He frantically scanned his surroundings, trying to locate the horrifying figure. And then, in the next moment, A grotesque, grinning face appeared right in front of him, so close their noses were nearly touching. Wah! The man's eyes widened in terror as he instinctively tried to back away. But Laura's razor-sharp bone claws sliced through his neck like a knife through butter. With a swift flick of her wrist, his head was sent flying, landing far away with a sickening thud. She's here. She's coming. The nearby soldiers panicked, their faces pale with fear. Among them was an awakener in the neurocore stage, who reacted the fastest. He gripped his alloy steel blade tightly and charged at Laura with a roar. Laura's figure blurred and disappeared again. When she reappeared, she was already behind the awakener. With a sickening squelch, her claws plunged into his lower back. In one brutal motion, she ripped out his kidney. Ah! The awakener let out a blood-curdling scream before collapsing to the ground, convulsing in agony. This is insane. She's a phantom infected. Run. Get out of here. The remaining soldiers, their will to fight completely shattered, turned and fled in terror. Hehehehe tilde. Laura let out a chilling, maniacal laugh as she chased after them. With every few steps, she brought another one down. Her claws, dripping with fresh blood, left a trail of crimson behind her. Her eyes gleamed with exhilaration, reveling in the thrill of the hunt. Michael and the other core team members noticed the chaos unfolding nearby. Even the awakeners couldn't hold their ground against Laura. We have to stop her. We can't let her keep slaughtering like this. I'll handle it. Xander stepped forward, volunteering once again. He was confident that his lightning-based abilities would allow him to match her speed. Of the 500 armed personnel they had brought, 80% were already dead. Only about 100 remained. Electricity crackled around Xander, arcs of lightning dancing across his body as his energy surged violently. Just as he was about to confront Laura, a sudden, overwhelming pressure filled the air. From the distant street, it felt as though a tidal wave of blood was rushing toward them. Everyone froze, their hearts gripped by an instinctive fear. The oppressive aura was suffocating, a primal force that made their very souls tremble. The true king had arrived. Everyone turned to look, their eyes drawn to the figure standing in the middle of the street. It was a tall, slender young man dressed in a pristine white shirt, spotless despite the chaos around him. His expression was cold, his hollow eyes devoid of any emotion. The way he looked at them, it wasn't like he was looking at people. It was as if he were staring at corpses. What is that? Is it a zombie? A female awakener hesitated, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Michael's frown deepened as he studied the figure. Yeah, I've never seen a zombie like this before. My guess. He's the real zombie king. He feels dangerous, muttered Evan, a psychic awakener whose sharp instincts rarely failed him. The sudden appearance of yet another zombie king only heightened the tension. It felt like they were being dragged deeper into an abyss, step by step. Xander, however, was growing impatient. He knew that if they didn't start taking down some of these zombie kings, their situation would only get worse. His frustration boiled over. Then I'll take care of you first. Xander growled, abandoning his pursuit of Laura and charging straight at the young man, Ethan. As a lightning-type awakener, Xander's speed was incredible. Electricity crackled around him, his body a blur as he shot forward like a bolt of lightning. Michael didn't stop him. When it came to raw offensive power, Xander was the strongest in their group. He was the blade of their Operation King Hunt team. But what happened next left everyone completely stunned. The moment Xander got close to Ethan, his speed suddenly dropped. It was as if he had run straight into quicksand. His movements became sluggish, his body heavy and unresponsive. Damn it. Xander's in danger. Michael's instincts kicked in, and he immediately began thinking of ways to provide support. At Nobleman at. But it was already too late. Ethan's domain of the dead had enveloped Xander. As Xander struggled to move, Ethan casually walked past him. Without even breaking stride, Ethan reached out and plunged his hand into Xander's skull, pulling out a glowing white crystal core. The ease with which he did it was chilling. It was like someone casually picking up an apple from a coffee table as they walked by. Xander's eyes widened in shock, his pupils dilating as the light faded from them. His face froze in an expression of disbelief and terror. A moment later, his lifeless body crumpled to the ground behind Ethan. Before anyone could react, a pack of elite zombies swarmed Xander's corpse, tearing it apart and devouring it in seconds. Oh my god. Michael and the others were frozen in place, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. They hadn't even seen how Ethan killed Xander. And Xander, their strongest attacker, was dead. This zombie was beyond terrifying. It's a phantom infected. This is a true phantom infected. Michael's face darkened, his heart sinking into despair. The others were equally shaken. Fear spread like wildfire among them. Are we all going to die here? The female awakener asked, her voice trembling, tears welling up in her eyes. Michael quickly tried to calm her down. No. If we can figure out his abilities, we might still have a chance to survive. But we can't stay out here. We need to find cover. Now. Agreed. The group immediately moved toward a nearby building. The female awakener used her metal manipulation ability to bend the steel reinforcements in the walls, creating a large hole for them to enter. The three of them quickly climbed inside, followed by a few other Neurocore stage awakeners and about a dozen armed soldiers. Outside, the remaining 100 soldiers were still fighting, but there was no time to wait for them. We can't worry about them now, Michael said firmly, his eyes hard. He had already decided to leave them behind. The female awakener didn't argue. She used her ability again to seal the hole in the wall, bending the steel back into place. Michael, still uneasy, used his earth-based powers to reinforce the walls further. Layers of sand and stone piled up, thickening the walls until they were nearly 30 feet thick. Every door, window, and crack was sealed tight. The building had become a fortress, cutting them off from the chaos outside. For a moment, the group finally felt a sliver of safety. The noise of the battlefield faded, leaving behind an eerie silence. Phew. Everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe. The armed soldiers who had made it inside felt especially lucky. They knew that if they had been left outside, their fate would have been sealed. But as they enjoyed this brief moment of peace, the scene outside turned into a slaughterhouse. The soldiers who had been left behind continued to fight, but their efforts were futile. Some of them suddenly realized that the awakeners were gone. They abandoned us. What do we do now? Two soldiers exchanged panicked glances, their faces pale. Before they could come up with a plan, a pack of elite zombies descended on them, tearing them apart. Blood sprayed everywhere as their screams filled the air. The street was filled with the sounds of agony and despair. The soldiers had no way out, no chance of survival. They were trapped in this hellish nightmare, overwhelmed by a crushing sense of helplessness. All they could do was wait for death to claim them, lost and broken in this brutal apocalypse. C-43. The battle was on the verge of exploding. However, Laura quickly showed them some love, putting an end to their suffering. One by one, the bodies dropped to the ground. This was the price of invasion. In just a couple of minutes, over 100 humans were wiped out, devoured by the zombies. With the humans in the middle taken care of, the red-faced zombie king and his crew finally came face to face with Ethan. Roar. The red-faced zombie king was absolutely furious. The losses today had been catastrophic, and now, at last, Ethan was standing right in front of him. As the saying goes, when enemies meet, their eyes burn with rage. The remaining zombies under the red-faced king followed his lead, letting out deafening roars. For a moment, the air was filled with the thunderous cries of the undead. The scene was overwhelming, a clash of titanic forces about to erupt. The battle was on the verge of exploding. Of course, Bulldozer, Laura, and the rest of Ethan's elite zombies weren't the type to get angry at a challenge. If anything, they were thrilled. They lived for this kind of fight. Go have some fun, Ethan said with a smirk. At his command, his crew charged forward without hesitation. The two zombie hordes sprinted at full speed, colliding like two tidal waves crashing into each other. But Ethan's crew was far too powerful, like professional football players plowing through a group of amateurs. The moment they clashed, the opposing zombies were sent flying, their bodies scattering like bowling pins. Bulldozer, in particular, was in his element. He loved this kind of chaos. Charging through the enemy ranks, he smashed through them like a wrecking ball, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Meanwhile, perched on top of a nearby high-rise, the red-faced zombie kings, Scarf, a grotesque creature called the human-faced rat, let out a series of high-pitched screeches. It had spotted the one who killed its mate, and its heart burned with hatred. The human-faced rat unleashed its eerie ability, mind control. A faint black mist began to spread, drifting toward Bulldozer, Laura, and the other zombies. But in a nearby alley, the PhD zombie was watching everything unfold. His sharp, calculating eyes were locked onto the human-faced rat. Unlike Bulldozer, who relied on brute strength, the PhD was cunning and methodical. The PhD had recently awakened a new ability, Mind Spike. He hadn't had a chance to use it yet in this battle, but now he saw his opportunity. As the human-faced rat's mental energy spread out, trying to control others, the PhD focused his own power. With a sudden burst of concentration, he struck. Crack. His mental energy transformed into a sharp spike, stabbing directly into the human-faced rat's mind. Screech. The human-faced rat let out a blood-curdling scream as its brain was racked with searing pain. It collapsed onto its back, its limbs twitching uncontrollably, foam bubbling from its mouth. Whether it was dead or alive was anyone's guess. My scarf. The red-faced zombie king roared in fury. He was starting to realize that his side was no match for Ethan's crew. Their level of evolution was simply too high. One of his top lieutenants, a nimble zombie nicknamed Monkey, leapt onto Bulldozer's back, baring its sharp teeth as it tried to bite into his skull. But Bulldozer wasn't having any of it. He reached back with one massive hand, grabbed Monkey by the upper jaw, and yanked its mouth open. Then, with a roar, he slammed Monkey into the ground with a brutal over-the-shoulder throw. You think you can bite my head? Bulldozer growled, his voice dripping with disdain. To make his point, he stomped on Monkey's body a couple more times for good measure. Ethan's crew tore through the opposing horde like a wrecking ball, leaving almost no casualties on their side. The red-faced zombie king was losing control, his frustration boiling over. You're all dead, he bellowed. He thrust his arms forward, and his muscles swelled grotesquely. Veins burst from his skin, writhing like countless tentacles, spreading across the street in a horrifying display. Several zombies were immediately impaled by the blood-soaked tendrils. But Ethan's crew didn't flinch. They charged forward, fearless, their jaws snapping down on the veins. Some of them were even more ferocious, ignoring the fact that they'd been impaled, continuing to fight with reckless abandon. They were like savage wolf pups. If they were going to die, they'd make sure to take a chunk out of their enemy first. Roar. Bulldozer let out a thunderous roar. Seeing his comrades skewered like kebabs was too much for him to bear. With a mighty leap, he closed the distance to the red-faced zombie king, raising his fist to strike. But despite his raw power, Bulldozer wasn't strong enough to take on the red-faced zombie king alone. Suddenly, the red-faced zombie's chest split open, and countless blood vessels surged out, wrapping tightly around Bulldozer. The tendrils pierced into his body, beginning to drain his flesh and blood. Bulldozer roared in pain, thrashing violently, but the blood vessels lifted him into the air, his feet dangling helplessly. He couldn't muster any strength to fight back. All of you, die. The red-faced zombie bellowed. As it absorbed more of Bulldozer's blood, its skin turned an even deeper shade of crimson. Veins bulged grotesquely across its face, making it look even more terrifying. But just as it was reveling in its dominance, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, a dark cloud appeared in the sky. It wasn't a storm. It was a massive flock of crows. Their eerie cries echoed as their glowing red eyes glinted with malice. The crows dove down like missiles, their sharp beaks tearing into the blood vessels. Their beaks were like scissors, slicing through the tendrils with ease. Blood sprayed everywhere, filling the air with a nauseating stench. Damn crows. The red-faced zombie roared in frustration. Unable to withstand the relentless assault, it was forced to retract its blood vessels. The pain was unbearable, and its body trembled as the crows continued to peck at it. Freed from the blood vessels, Bulldozer dropped to the ground. He looked up and saw a familiar red-eyed crow among the flock. It was the same little black bird he'd tried to catch earlier. Bulldozer couldn't believe it. The bird had come to help him. The little black bird had repaid cruelty with kindness. Instead of holding a grudge for being chased, it had come to save his life. Bulldozer felt a wave of emotion swell in his chest. Little black bird, you're amazing. I swear, I'll never try to catch you again, he said, his voice full of gratitude. Big idiot. Big idiot. The crow squawked, flapping its wings as it flew away, just like it had the last time. Bulldozer stood there, speechless. With the help of the crows, the red-faced zombie had lost its trump card. It was furious but helpless. When it looked up, it realized it was completely surrounded. Ethan's elite zombies had closed in, their eyes gleaming with deadly intent. Each one was a powerhouse in its own right. It's over, the red-faced zombie muttered, a sinking feeling of doom washing over it. At Nobleman at. Meanwhile, Ethan's figure flickered as he used his domain of the dead ability to phase through walls, entering the building where Michael and his group were hiding. The building had once been a hotel, but now it was a scene of utter devastation. Bloodstains marred the marble floors, a grim reminder of the chaos that had unfolded here. When the apocalypse hit, the hotel had been packed with people, making it one of the hardest hit areas. Now, the walls of the hotel had been sealed off by Michael and his team using their abilities. The barriers were a staggering 30 feet thick. Man, with powers like that, you should have gone into construction, Ethan thought to himself, amused. The space inside was completely sealed off, shrouded in darkness. Not a single ray of sunlight penetrated the thick walls. The only light came from a few tactical flashlights held by armed survivors, their beams flickering in the distance. Michael and his group were sitting on the ground, trying to catch their breath. We need to recover some strength while we can, Michael said, his voice calm but firm. We burned through too much energy earlier. Yeah, Evan agreed, nodding. Hiding in here was the right call. At least the zombies can't get in. We've got time, Evan added. But man, blocking that human-faced rat's mind control earlier, I feel like it drained my soul. Evan, just stop talking, one of the women in the group said, her voice trembling with worry. She was an awakener, but her face was pale, her expression filled with dread. She couldn't shake the memory of what had happened earlier. The Zombie King's abilities were beyond anything they'd ever encountered. In just a single moment, it had killed Xander effortlessly, as if it were taking a casual stroll. She had read reports about phantom infected before. The data was clear. Even awakeners had an 80% mortality rate when facing one. Who the hell collected the intel on this place? She snapped, her voice breaking. How could they classify this as a one-star zombie nest? Her emotions were spiraling out of control, the fear and despair overwhelming her. C-44 this time, the intel was definitely wrong. This time, the intel was definitely wrong. With the Zombie King's bizarre abilities, this mission should have been rated at least 4 or 5 stars in difficulty. Michael said, his brows furrowed. At Nobleman at. Even now, thinking back to what had happened earlier, he couldn't shake the lingering fear. That tall, slender figure, it was utterly terrifying. Faced with such a hopeless situation, the female awakener couldn't hold back her tears. Her voice trembled as she choked out, I don't want to die yet. It's okay. At least we're safe for now. Let's rest up a bit and. Evan started to comfort her, but his words suddenly trailed off. A heavy sense of foreboding crept over him. As a psychic-type awakener, his sensitivity to danger was far sharper than most. And right now, he felt it, something was approaching them. Evan's body tensed as if he were sitting on needles. A chill ran down his spine. Instinctively, he turned to look behind him, but all he saw was darkness. Nothing was there. Evan, what's wrong? Michael asked, noticing his strange behavior. Evan's brows knitted tightly. I think something's here. What? The others froze, their faces filled with disbelief. Evan, don't scare me like that. Yeah, the walls are so thick, and they're reinforced. There's no way anything could get in. Didn't we just say this place was safe? Quote. The group murmured nervously among themselves. I'm not sure, Evan said, rubbing his temples. Maybe I overexerted myself earlier. My nerves are probably just too wound up. It wasn't impossible. When someone was under extreme stress, hallucinations weren't uncommon. Maybe his instincts were just off this time. But just as Evan turned his head back, a tall, slender figure materialized behind him out of thin air. Its white shirt was pristine, its expression cold and emotionless, like the Grim Reaper himself. Michael and the female awakener, sitting directly across from Evan, saw it first. Their eyes widened in sheer horror, as if they'd just seen a ghost. Their faces twisted in disbelief, and for a moment, they even questioned their own sanity. He's here. The female awakener stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Evan frowned, confused. Who? But before he could finish the question, he realized something was wrong. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the space behind him, their faces pale with terror. There really was something there. A suffocating sense of danger surged through him again. He could feel the cold breath of death on his neck. He didn't dare turn around, afraid that doing so would seal his fate. But he couldn't stop himself. The urge to look was overwhelming. Slowly, he turned his head, only to feel a massive hand clamp down on the top of his skull. The hand pierced through his head effortlessly, extracting his crystal core in one swift motion. Thud. Evan's body collapsed to the ground as he turned, lifeless. In his final moments, he caught a glimpse of that pristine white shirt. The figure of death had truly arrived. And with his last thought, a chilling realization struck him. Everyone here is going to die. Michael's eyes were wide with shock, his entire body frozen. He had hunted zombie kings before, but he had never seen anything like this. The sheer brutality of the kill, the way the figure moved, it sent shivers down his spine. What made it worse was the impossibility of it all. The walls around them were reinforced, impenetrable. Yet somehow, this thing had slipped in without a sound. A deep, unsettling dread settled in his heart. This was a true phantom infected. The female awakener's face turned deathly pale as she stared at Ethan's figure, her body trembling uncontrollably. Fear gripped her so tightly that she couldn't even move. This graveyard. Not bad, Ethan said, his cold gaze sweeping across the room. Michael wasn't about to sit there and wait to die. Fire! Open fire! He shouted. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat. The armed personnel pulled their triggers, the muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness as a storm of bullets rained down on Ethan. But Ethan's body shimmered with a faint red glow, and in the next moment, it was as if he had turned into a phantom. The bullets passed straight through him, slamming harmlessly into the reinforced walls behind him. What the? The group was paralyzed with fear. Their hearts sank as they realized the truth. This phantom infected was no ordinary enemy. Their weapons were completely useless. A wave of despair washed over them. Still, they kept firing, the deafening roar of gunfire echoing through the space. It wasn't just an attack on Ethan anymore, it was their final act of defiance against the cruelty of this world. Why? Why is it like this? But before they could even process their hopelessness, Ethan unleashed his domain of the dead. The oppressive energy spread out, blanketing the entire area. The gunfire abruptly stopped. The armed personnel, mere humans with no special abilities, couldn't withstand the overwhelming pressure. Their bodies burst apart like overripe watermelons, one after another, leaving nothing but blood and gore in their wake. It was a massacre. Michael and the female awakener, already drained from their earlier battles, were no exception. The domain of the dead pressed down on them like an unrelenting tide, leaving them in excruciating pain. The female awakener gritted her teeth, her mind racing. Facing a phantom infected like this, the odds of survival weren't just 80% against them, it was more like 99.99999%. Die, she screamed, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth as she pushed her body past its limits, unleashing the last of her energy. From the reinforced walls around them, countless steel rods shot out like arrows, slicing through the air and converging on Ethan from all directions. These rods weren't ordinary, they were infused with the energy of her crystal core. Ethan didn't take them head on. With a casual wave of his hand, the power of the domain of the dead condensed, sending the steel rods flying in all directions. In the blink of an eye, Ethan appeared in front of the female awakener. Her eyes filled with despair as she watched him reach out and effortlessly extract her crystal core. Her body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. As her consciousness faded, one final thought crossed her mind. Who the hell gathered the intel for this mission? They called this a one-star zombie nest. I hope that intel officer runs into zombies like this every damn day. With the female awakener's death, the Operation King Hunt squad was almost entirely wiped out. Only Michael remained. But Michael's will to survive was strong. Seizing the brief moment when the power of the domain of the dead dispersed slightly, he unleashed the last of his energy. Armor of Earth. With a single thought, the dirt and debris from the surrounding walls surged toward him, wrapping around his body. In an instant, he transformed into a towering earth giant. Now standing over 10 feet tall, Michael's body was covered in thick, rock-like armor. His massive arms were as thick as a grown man's waist, radiating raw power. Under the crushing pressure of the domain of the dead, Michael forced himself to move. He raised one of his massive arms and swung it at Ethan with all his might, the sound of the air splitting under the force of his punch echoing through the room. Ethan didn't dodge. Instead, he raised his own fist and met Michael's attack head-on. This opponent was a little interesting. So Ethan decided to use 80% of his strength. In the darkness, the sound of a sonic boom tore through the air as Ethan's iron fist shot forward like a dragon breaking free from its chains, unstoppable and devastating. Boom. The moment their fists collided, it was like two mountains crashing into each other. The deafening impact reverberated through the space, followed by the sharp sound of cracking. Michael's earth-armored fist, which had seemed so indestructible, began to fracture. Spiderweb-like cracks spread across it, and chunks of the armor started to fall away. In mere moments, the armor on his arm shattered completely, revealing his real arm underneath. It hung limp at his side, completely numb and useless. So strong, Michael muttered through gritted teeth, his face twisted in pain. His heart sank further as he realized the truth. This zombie king wasn't just bizarrely powerful, It was physically unstoppable. It was an enemy without weakness. C-45. Whoa. Is that really a zombie? Ethan analyzed the situation calmly. Among all the awakeners he had hunted, Michael was probably the strongest. An Earth-based ability, both offensive and defensive. But it was time to end this. With a single thought, Ethan expanded his absolute domain to its limit. The overwhelming pressure crashed down on Michael, making his body feel like it was being crushed. He staggered, nearly collapsing to the ground. His body was completely spent. He had reached his limit. Ethan moved in a flash, appearing right in front of Michael. He raised his fist and slammed it into Michael's chest. Boom. The impact shattered the dirt armor surrounding Michael, sending him flying backward. He crashed through the wall behind him and was thrown outside the building. Cough. 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 Michael lay on the ground, coughing up blood. He couldn't get back up. The bright light outside felt unbearably harsh to his eyes. A horde of zombies was already closing in on him. Among them was Bulldozer, casually tossing a severed head in his right hand like a ball. It was the head of the red-faced zombie king. Beside him stood Laura, her sharp bone claws still dripping with fresh blood. She tilted her head, a sinister smile on her face, as she studied the man lying on the ground. Behind them was a massive crowd of elite zombies, over 1,000 strong. They had just defeated the red-faced zombie king, and the thrill of the slaughter still lingered in their minds. So, this is how it ends, huh? Michael stared at the grotesque faces surrounding him, his vision growing blurrier by the second. He had always known this day would come. He just hadn't expected it to be so soon. Soon, he would leave this cruel world behind. From now on, none of it would matter to him anymore. A faint sense of relief crossed Michael's face. Might as well say goodbye properly. Ethan stepped forward, looking down at him. He noticed the complicated emotions in Michael's eyes. Fear, regret, but also a strange sense of peace. Got any last words? Ethan asked. At Nobleman at. Michael froze for a moment. He hadn't expected a zombie to speak, let alone in such a deep, magnetic voice. It was nothing like the cold, ruthless killer he had just faced. For a brief moment, Michael had the strange illusion that the figure standing before him was human. Cough. Cough. Kid, I know you're strong, but don't get cocky. Genesis Biotech. They're not as simple as you think. They've got a lot of secret projects, stuff they'd never make public. That's where the real danger is. Ethan nodded slightly. He had already suspected as much. The real trump cards wouldn't be something they'd broadcast online. Plans like the Zombie Eradication Initiative, or Operation King Hunt, were just for show, to build public trust. Michael's eyes grew more unfocused. He started muttering something under his breath. Phantom infected. Phantom infected. They're feeding the zombies, breeding phantom infected. Ellipsis. A cold wind blew past. Michael's pupils dilated. He was dead. The area fell silent. Even Bulldozer stopped playing with the severed head. He turned to the PhD zombie standing nearby and whispered. Hey, what do you think that human was talking about? With your level of intelligence, I'm not sure how to explain it to you, the PhD zombie replied thoughtfully. Oh, Bulldozer nodded, pretending to understand. But after a moment, he frowned. Something didn't feel right. Wait, was he calling me stupid? Laura and the others walked over to Ethan, glancing at Michael's lifeless body. Master, I think that human made a good point before he died, Laura said. A dying man speaks the truth, Ethan replied. The surrounding zombies, with their limited intelligence, couldn't quite grasp the meaning of his words, especially Bulldozer. But his curiosity was insatiable. Hey, boss, what does that mean? It means, if a human's being difficult, beat them until they're almost dead. Then they'll start talking sense. Oh, I get it now. This time, Bulldozer understood. He felt like he had learned something profound and immediately treated it as a golden rule. As expected of the boss, everything he says makes so much sense. Bulldozer shot a disdainful glance at the PhD zombie beside him, as if to say, if you can't explain it to me, maybe it's your intelligence that's the problem. With that, the battle came to an end. The streets were littered with mangled flesh and severed limbs. The scene was one of utter devastation, chaos stretching as far as the eye could see. A flock of black crows cawed noisily as they pecked at the scattered remains. For scavengers, even zombie flesh seemed to be a delicacy. Let's go. Time to head back, Ethan commanded. Rarg. The horde of zombies behind him let out triumphant roars. Victorious from the battle, They were like soldiers returning from a hard-fought war, their spirits high. They had taken down the red-faced zombie king, and with his defeat, their territory had expanded significantly. From the skyscraper to the park, their domain had tripled in size. The battle had also been a huge haul for Ethan. He'd collected 6 crystal cores, a massive reward. Over the next few days, Ethan stayed holed up in his base as usual. He absorbed the crystal cores, ate meat, drank blood, and continuously replenished his energy reserves. Meanwhile, Bulldozer, Laura, and the PhD zombie had been unusually busy. With the territory now much larger, the 3 zombie leaders had recruited a significant number of new underlings. Their forces had grown from 2,000 to over 10,000 in just a few days, and the numbers were still climbing. Ethan had officially become the zombie king, ruling over a horde of tens of thousands. But to Ethan, it still wasn't enough. If he could multiply that number by 100, then it might be barely acceptable. That said, the newly recruited underlings weren't exactly elite. They were stationed on the outskirts of the territory, serving as a disposable outer defense. The original 2,000 elite zombies, however, remained stationed around the skyscraper. They were Ethan's personal guard corps. Life in the expanded territory. No one was happier about the expansion than Bulldozer. He spent his days wandering the streets, patrolling the area like a self-appointed neighborhood watch. He'd look for intruders or anything that might have snuck into their territory. On lucky days, he'd even catch a few human survivors to snack on. Life was good for him, simple and satisfying. If his underlings were living the good life, Ethan was living even better. After that battle, no one dared to provoke him anymore. And without realizing it, Ethan had become a nightmare for humanity. Meanwhile, on Genesis Biotech's website, the photos of Michael and his team had all turned grayscale, a grim marker indicating that the entire Operation King Hunt squad had been wiped out. Since Genesis Biotech had launched its anti-zombie operations, casualties were common. But a complete squad wipe. That was a first. The incident drew widespread attention. Michael was a B+ level awakener, and he still got killed by a zombie. That's brutal. The whole squad's gone. I wonder what they ran into out there. Phantom infected. Obviously. I heard a drone even caught a photo of it. Seriously. Quote. Ethan scrolled through the comments and found that there really was a photo. It wasn't very clear, taken from a great distance, but it showed a lone figure standing on the edge of a skyscraper rooftop. A flock of crows circled around him. The image had a dark, ominous vibe. The comments on the photo had already surpassed the discussion about the Operation King Hunt squad's demise. Whoa, is that really a zombie? This feels so oppressive. It's just too blurry. And the crows are blocking his face. This isn't just any zombie. That's a phantom infected. Who knows how many people it's slaughtered. Okay, but, is it weird that I think he looks kinda cool? Wait, same. Why does he look so badass? C46 I haven't eaten in 10 days. Online, people were buzzing with all kinds of opinions. Meanwhile, over at Genesis Biotech, Nathan, the person in charge, was fuming, silently cursing to himself. Michael and his team are such useless idiots. Wiped out by zombies. Seriously. Couldn't even leave 1 or 2 survivors. But deep down, he knew the truth. Near the building, there was a powerful zombie king. Even the company's strongest awakener probably wouldn't stand a chance against it. It seemed. The zombies were just stronger. To kill a phantom infected, it would take another, even more powerful zombie king. The zombie cultivation project has to continue. Ideally, we need to create phantom infected that we can control, Nathan thought to himself. He was fully aware that feeding zombies was like playing with fire, but for the sake of that immense power, he was willing to take the risk. Or, if the opportunity arises, maybe we could even cooperate with the zombie king. All it would take is providing them with some flesh and blood. I need to notify the rescue teams to speed up their search for survivors. Ethan, on the other hand, was still at home, completely unaware of Genesis Biotech's plans. Not that he cared. By now, everyone knew there was a powerful zombie king in the area near the building. It was extremely dangerous and had been declared a no-go zone. Because of this, no one dared to disturb Ethan. In the past, helicopters would occasionally fly overhead, but now, even those had stopped. This area had become a zombie sanctuary. Ethan's life was incredibly comfortable. He had plenty of food and drink, consumed energy daily, and kept evolving. When he got bored, he'd watch TV or play video games. For him, the apocalypse felt more like a vacation. There wasn't a single thing to worry about. Shelter news. Our researchers have improved the survival rations. This high-fiber emergency food can be consumed in small amounts without causing stomach discomfort and can serve as a temporary hunger solution. The water purification system has been fully repaired. Please drink with confidence. There will no longer be large-scale outbreaks of parasites or viral infections. Tragic news. Our supply retrieval team was ambushed by an unknown group. If anyone has information, please report it immediately, at @Nobleman@. Quote. The TV was broadcasting updates from the official shelter. It was clear they were in dire straits. They were down to eating emergency rations, their water situation had been terrible, and now, even after finally finding some supplies, they'd been robbed by an unknown force. It was just pitiful. Ethan spared them a moment of sympathy, exactly 1 second, before turning back to his video game. At the edge of Ethan's territory, a small group of people was hiding inside a building. The place used to be a karaoke bar, a 3-story building. Now, the doors and windows were all barricaded, leaving only a few small gaps to observe the outside. Shish. Zombies are coming. Don't make a sound. A man crouched by the window, peeking through a crack to watch the street outside. Behind him, 2 others held their breath, not daring to make a noise. On the street outside, a massive figure lumbered along, swaying with every step. Behind it trailed a group of zombies. It was Bulldozer, patrolling the area. Fortunately, Bulldozer's senses weren't very sharp, and it didn't notice the humans hiding inside the building. With its entourage of smaller zombies, it slowly moved away. Phew. The people inside let out a collective sigh of relief, finally able to relax a little. Good thing this brute-type zombie is dumb as a rock. Inside one of the private rooms of the karaoke bar, a few more people were lounging on the sofas. Thanks to the soundproofing of the KTV rooms, they didn't have to worry about the zombies outside being alerted. We're safe hiding here. No way the people from the official shelter will find us, said a bald, burly man. Yeah, boss, you're right. Even if they know we're here, they probably wouldn't dare come after us. This is the territory of a powerful zombie king, after all. Another man chimed in. This group was none other than the infamous Blackhand Legion, the ones who had ambushed and stolen supplies from the official shelter. The Blackhand Legion had existed even before the apocalypse, operating in the shadows of the dark web. They were like a cult, worshipping the idea of absolute freedom, living without rules, doing whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Back then, societal order kept them in check, preventing them from causing too much chaos. But when the apocalypse hit, it was like their dreams had come true. Your next chapter awaits on Empire. Those among them who awakened special abilities banded together, raiding supplies, killing survivors, and committing every atrocity imaginable. Heh. The apocalypse is our time to shine. The bald man's eyes gleamed with excitement. In the middle of the KTV room, 3 people were kneeling on the floor, their hands and feet tied together. Their mouths were stuffed with dirty rags, so all they could do was let out muffled groans of protest. These 3 were awakeners from the official shelter, tasked with transporting supplies. Unfortunately, they had been ambushed by the Blackhand Legion during their mission. Boss, what do we do with these 3? A wiry man asked. The bald man thought for a moment. Keep them alive for now. They're our bargaining chips. If they die, we can feed their neurocores to the others, and their flesh can be used as food. Meanwhile, on the other side of Ethan's territory, another group of people had appeared. Leading the group was a young woman with large eyes, straight brown hair with bangs, and a strikingly beautiful face. But despite her beauty, there was a perpetual air of disdain for the world etched into her expression. This was Mia, the official shelter's number 001 awakener. Mia genuinely hated the world. She had grown up in an orphanage, only to later be confined to a mental institution. When she finally got out, she found herself in the middle of the apocalypse. With a life like that, who wouldn't hate the world? The only thing she could look back on fondly were the rare, warm memories from her time in the orphanage. Walking beside her was her partner, Sean, a man with a sharp, calculating gaze that gave him an air of intelligence. Gurgle. Sean clutched his stomach, the intense hunger making him visibly uncomfortable. If not for the enhanced physique of an awakener, he might have already passed out from starvation. When are we gonna find some supplies? I haven't eaten in 10 days. Sean groaned. Sean, we've only been out here for 3 days, Mia replied flatly. Behind them were 4 other awakeners who had reached the neurocore stage. Their main job was to assist Mia and Sean, primarily by carrying supplies once they found them. Sean scratched his head, his clever eyes darting around. Only 3 days. I'm so hungry I can't even count anymore. Like you could count in the first place, Mia shot back without even looking at him. The street ahead of them was desolate. Rusted, wrecked cars were piled up, some of them overgrown with moss. The surrounding buildings were in ruins, their shattered windows occasionally echoing with the distant growls of zombies. One of the neurocore awakeners, Chris, spoke up cautiously. Up ahead is where the Genesis biotech team was wiped out. They say there's a strange and incredibly powerful zombie king in the area. Sean raised an eyebrow. Oh, Chris, are the people who stole our supplies hiding in that area? Chris nodded. Based on the direction they retreated, there's a high chance they're somewhere in that zone. Then let's go find them, Sean said casually, his recklessness on full display. Chris hesitated but nodded, adding a word of caution. Remember, our main goal is to find supplies. Whatever you do, don't provoke the zombies here. C-47 My eyes are like zombie detectors. The 6 of them moved forward cautiously, their bodies coated with a special ointment that masked their scent. As long as they didn't make any noise, they'd be fine. The zombies on the outskirts weren't densely packed, so as long as they avoided them, they wouldn't attract attention. From a distance, Chris spotted a few zombies standing in the middle of the street. They swayed unsteadily, their expressions blank and almost foolish. The group hugged the walls, moving slowly and quietly. Using abandoned vehicles as cover, they planned to circle around the zombies from behind. But just as they were halfway through, Sean's stomach suddenly let out a loud grumble. Chris and the others froze instantly, their expressions changing as their hearts leapt into their throats. The sound wasn't particularly loud, but zombies had unnaturally sharp hearing. The swaying zombies immediately stopped in their tracks. They stiffened, their heads tilting slightly as low growls rumbled from their throats. It was as if they were trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. Mia's sharp eyes narrowed as she prepared for a fight. The rest of the group crouched behind the wrecked cars, holding their breath. No one dared to make the slightest sound. Thankfully, after a tense moment, the zombies seemed to lose interest. They returned to their sluggish, swaying movements, their blank expressions back in place. Phew. Chris and the others exhaled in relief, quickly moving to bypass the dangerous area. Once they were far enough away, one of the awakeners muttered nervously, Sean, you almost got us killed back there. I was hungry, okay. Sean replied, completely unapologetic. Chris quickly stepped in to calm things down. Alright, let's focus on the mission. Once we find the supplies, there'll be food for everyone. Yeah, Sean grumbled, but the thought of food seemed to energize him. He started daydreaming about it, imagining the moment he'd sink his teeth into a piece of bread, washing it down with an ice-cold soda. Pure bliss. With that motivation, the group pressed on, moving carefully. So far, things were going relatively smoothly. They managed to avoid wave after wave of zombies. When necessary, they even climbed onto rooftops, moving across tiles like assassins straight out of Assassin's Creed. Still, Chris couldn't shake his unease. The deeper they ventured, the more dangerous it became. They were now in the heart of the area, where the zombies were more evolved and far more perceptive. According to the updated intel from Genesis Biotech, this area had been classified as a 5-star zombie nest. Woo, woo, woo. Suddenly, the sound of a woman crying echoed through the air. The wailing was sharp and eerie, rising and falling in pitch like a banshee's lament. It was the kind of sound that sent chills down your spine, as if it came straight from the depths of hell. The 6 of them were lying flat on a rooftop. They immediately turned toward the source of the sound and spotted a female zombie kneeling on the ground, her head bowed as she sobbed. At Nobleman at. Holy. Chris sucked in a sharp breath, his entire body breaking out in goosebumps. The sight was utterly horrifying. I'm starving, and I'm not crying. What's her problem? Sean muttered, craning his neck to get a better look. She's probably hungrier than you, Mia replied dryly. We can't go that way. We'll have to find another route, Chris said decisively. The female zombie wasn't alone. Around her were dozens of other zombies, their movements quick and deliberate. They weren't the sluggish, mindless kind, they were clearly highly evolved. Besides, the group they were tracking, the ones who had looted the supplies, couldn't possibly be hiding here. If they were, they'd have been torn apart by the zombies long ago. The six of them were just about to take a detour when Laura, with her unnervingly sharp senses, seemed to notice their gaze. Her hair hung loose, covering most of her face, leaving only one eye visible. Suddenly, she whipped her head around to look directly at them. The moment her eye locked onto them, her pupil contracted to a pinprick, making her look even more terrifying. Hey, tilde tilde tilde, the eerie crying abruptly turned into a sinister laugh. In a flash, Laura's figure blurred as she bolted toward them like a gust of wind. Damn it, we've been spotted. Chris's face darkened, his heart pounding with fear. He had never encountered a zombie this horrifying before. As Laura charged, her sudden movement startled the nearby zombies. Roar. Hundreds of elite zombies let out deafening howls, forming a small horde as they surged forward in a frenzy. Their movements were swift and agile, and with just a few leaps, they were already scaling the rooftops. Even though the six of them were perched high above, it was no longer a safe haven. What do we do now? Chris asked, panic creeping into his voice. For once, he was out of ideas. Mia, however, remained calm. What else? We fight our way out. Got it. The group, all awakeners with neurocore enhanced abilities, drew alloy blades from their belts. These weapons, specially crafted by researchers, were both durable and razor sharp, capable of cutting down high-tier zombies. Enjoy new adventures from Empire. But even with their weapons, the sheer number of elite zombies made them uneasy. Even Mia, the renowned awakener from Refuge 001, hailed as the strongest among them, couldn't guarantee victory. There were simply too many zombies. Even a lion could be overwhelmed by a pack of wolves. And to make matters worse, among the horde was Laura, a terrifyingly agile zombie queen. Laura's figure darted closer and closer. The recent peace in the area had left her and her kind restless. Boredom had driven her to the brink of madness, so much so that she had cried out in frustration earlier. Now, finally spotting prey, she was ecstatic. But just as she was about to reach her target, a voice echoed in her mind. Wait, don't kill them, yet. Laura's rapid charge came to an abrupt halt. It was the voice of her leader. As much as she craved bloodshed, she had to obey. Reluctantly, she cast a lingering glance at Chris and the others before veering off to the side. What the? Chris's entire body trembled. He knew he'd never forget the haunting, resentful look in that female zombie's eye. But what happened next left them even more stunned. The once raging zombie horde suddenly quieted down. One by one, the zombies dispersed, retreating in all directions. Within moments, the entire horde had vanished. What just happened? The six of them were dumbfounded. It was the first time they had encountered anything like this. They had been ready to fight to the death, prepared for a desperate last stand. And yet, the zombie tide had simply melted away. Oh, I get it now, Sean said, nodding as if he'd cracked the case. They were just trying to scare us. Chris was speechless. Why would they bother scaring you? There's got to be something else going on. What kind of something else? Mia asked, equally puzzled. Still, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe this world wasn't always as bleak as it seemed. Sometimes, it offered small, unexpected surprises. At that moment, a tall figure appeared at the end of the street. He was strikingly handsome, his sharp eyes scanning the group. Ethan's gaze landed on Mia. As he looked at her, her face began to overlap with a memory from his past. Childhood scenes played out in his mind, one after another, pulling him back to a time long gone. It's been a while, he said softly. Mia froze. After spending 10 years in a psychiatric facility, her heart had long since grown cold and unfeeling, like a slab of ice. But now, seeing that familiar figure, her heartbeat quickened. That face, it carried so many memories. Memories of warmth, of fleeting happiness in a life otherwise filled with despair. Sean, on the other hand, was ecstatic. He remembered Ethan vividly, and his unique eyes were already welling up with tears. In this desolate, post-apocalyptic world, running into a childhood friend felt like a miracle. Without hesitation, Sean leapt down from the rooftop and landed in front of Ethan. Ethan, it's really you. I can't believe we're meeting here. But Chris and the others weren't so quick to celebrate. The more they thought about what had just happened, the retreating zombies, the strange behavior, the more uneasy they felt. Adding to their suspicion was the resemblance between Ethan and a figure they'd seen in blurry photos circulating online. Sean, be careful, he might be a zombie. Chris warned. Don't be ridiculous. Sean snapped, clearly annoyed. How could you say that? He was visibly upset. After all, this was his childhood friend, someone he hadn't seen in 10 years. To hear him accused of being a zombie was infuriating. Ethan isn't a zombie. My eyes are like zombie detectors. I'd know if he was one. Sean declared confidently. C-48 wheel trade. Zombie detectors. Chris and the others stared at Ethan with what could only be described as a brilliant expression on his face. For some reason, the camera on this so-called detector seemed a little off-kilter. It's been a while, hasn't it? Mia leapt down from the rooftop, a rare trace of emotion flickering in her eyes. She hadn't expected to run into Ethan in this brutal, apocalyptic world. The coincidence was almost unbelievable. What are you doing here? Just passing through, Ethan replied casually. Sean, on the other hand, was visibly excited. With a big grin, he said, this place is a 5-star zombie nest. There were a ton of zombies here earlier, it was super dangerous. The fact that you made it out alive is pretty impressive. Ethan glanced at Sean, taking in those unique eyes of his. After all these years, Sean really hadn't changed one bit. What about you guys? What are you doing here? Someone stole our supplies and holed up in this area. We're here to track them down. Sean explained. Oh, Ethan raised an eyebrow. He'd heard about the stolen supplies from the shelter, but he hadn't expected the thieves to hide out in his territory. When did this happen? And why didn't he know about it? I know this area pretty well. Maybe I can help you find them. Really? That'd be awesome. Sean didn't think twice. To him, running into an old friend and having him join their group was nothing but good news. But Chris and the others standing behind him. They were frozen in place, too scared to make a move. In their minds, Ethan was most likely the zombie king, the source of all the danger in this area. And now Sean was inviting him to join their team. This world had officially gone insane. It was like a mouse inviting a cat to dinner. Mia nodded in agreement and added, yeah, once we find the supplies, we can take you back to the shelter. It's safe there. PFF'd. Chris and the others nearly choked. Sean was already ridiculous enough, but Mia. She was on another level. She was actually suggesting they bring Ethan back to the shelter. At this point, they weren't even sure if the shelter was safe anymore. That probably depended on Ethan's mood. Ethan thought for a moment but didn't outright refuse. We'll see. All right, Mia replied, then turned to the 4 people behind her. What are you guys doing still hiding on the roof? Come down already. Okay. Chris and the others answered hesitantly. Their voices were shaky, and their expressions were filled with worry, but they still jumped down to the street and cautiously approached. The closer they got to Ethan, the stronger their unease grew. They couldn't tell if it was just their imagination, but there was an inexplicable sense of danger in the air. And then they noticed Ethan's eyes. They were cold, devoid of any emotion. When he looked at them, it was as if he were staring at livestock. The only time his gaze showed any spark of life was when he spoke to Mia or Sean. Let me introduce you, Mia said, gesturing to the group. These 4 are awakeners from the shelter, Chris, Nick. She went through each name. Ethan responded with a single, indifferent grunt. He didn't even bother to look at the 4 of them, his attitude making it clear he didn't consider them worth his attention. Chris forced a smile, his nerves barely holding together. Ah. Hi, nice to meet you. The 4 of them were on edge, but for now, it seemed like Ethan didn't intend to kill them. If he had, the horde of zombies from earlier would have been more than enough to finish them off. So, they decided to play dumb and pretend Ethan was just a regular human. Sean, however, wasn't pretending. He was genuinely clueless. And incredibly enthusiastic. Nobleman at. Ethan, once we find the supplies, you've got to join us for a feast. We'll have fried chicken and beer, it'll be like a reunion party. Sure, Ethan agreed without hesitation. Just then, Sean's stomach let out a loud, embarrassing growl. The intense hunger made his head spin, his limbs go weak, and he almost collapsed on the spot. Ethan took one look at him and immediately understood his condition. You're starving to this extent, and you're still thinking about treating me to a meal. How about I treat you first? You have food on you right now. Sean's brilliant eyes widened in disbelief. A little, not much. With a casual wave of his hand, Ethan pulled out some bread, sausages, and a pack of beef jerky from his spatial storage ring. These were supplies he'd looted from a warehouse not long ago, priceless in this apocalyptic world. His storage ring was still stocked with plenty of them, but to him, they weren't of much use. Sean stared at the food, completely dumbfounded. It was like Ethan had conjured it out of thin air. Uncontrollable tears of gratitude welled up in his eyes, or maybe it was just drool. There was beef jerky in there. His favorite snack. Thanks. I won't hold back then. Sean grabbed the food, tore open the packaging, and started stuffing his face. Enjoy exclusive content from Empire. The rich, oily flavor of the beef jerky spread across his tongue, the spicy and savory taste lighting up his senses. This is amazing. Hunger truly is the best seasoning. In Sean's current state, the beef jerky tasted like the finest delicacy on earth. Watching Sean devour the food, Ethan couldn't help but be reminded of their childhood. Back in the orphanage, Sean had always loved beef jerky. He was so afraid of the other kids stealing it that he'd hide it under his blanket when he slept. Of course, it didn't take long for the jerky to get squished, leaving a greasy mess all over his bed. The headmaster had scolded him so badly that day. Gulp. Mia, watching Sean eat with such relish, couldn't help but swallow hard. Her mouth watered involuntarily, and her stomach let out a faint growl of its own. Ethan glanced at her but didn't say anything. Instead, he pulled out more food, bread, sausages, and beef jerky, this time adding a bottle of chocolate-flavored Ensure meal replacement shake. He handed it to her. I'm not hungry, Mia said, shaking her head in refusal. Ethan studied her for a moment. Still the same as when we were kids. Soft all over, but stubborn to the core. It's fine. Just eat. Okay. Mia hesitantly took the food, but her mind was still conflicted. In the apocalypse, food was incredibly precious. Ethan had just said he didn't have much, so she felt guilty taking it. What's wrong now? Ethan asked, noticing her hesitation and the strange look on her face. Mia stared at him blankly, then picked up the bread and said, it's expired. Ethan was speechless. Eat it or don't. Your choice. The bread's label did show it was past its expiration date, but since it had been stored in his spatial ring, it was perfectly preserved and completely safe to eat. Mia stopped overthinking it. I'll just repay him later, she thought. She opened the packaging and began eating. Meanwhile, Chris and the other three stood in the back, staring intently at the food. Their stomachs churned, growling loudly as they watched, their mouths practically watering. But none of them dared to ask Ethan for anything. The way he'd pulled food out of thin air was enough to show how strange and powerful he was. And if they weren't careful, they might end up becoming the food. So, the four of them quickly turned their heads away. Out of sight, out of mind. It didn't take long for Mia to finish eating. She looked noticeably more energetic afterward. I'll pay you back for this food, she said. Or I can trade neurocores or crystal cores for it. In the shelter, one neurocore could be exchanged for a bag of instant noodles, and one crystal core could get you an entire box. This kind of value exchange was second nature to them now, so she felt awkward just taking Ethan's food for free. Yeah, exactly. Sean chimed in, his mouth still greasy from the jerky. We'll trade. I'm not just freeloading. C49. Hey, beautiful, let's have some fun. Mia and Ethan finished eating, recharged their energy, and continued their search for members of the Blackhand Legion. Thanks to Ethan, the journey was surprisingly smooth. The ferocious zombies that usually roamed the streets seemed to have vanished without a trace. It was almost surreal. Mia felt like she was just taking a casual afternoon stroll through the city. Ethan chatted with the two of them as they walked, reminiscing about things like picking cherries and making dumplings. His demeanor was so relaxed, it was as if the apocalypse didn't exist. Chris and the others exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't dare ask questions, nor did they dare say anything. They simply followed behind in silence, doing their best to act invisible. But they couldn't help noticing something unusual. Mia, who was usually quiet and reserved, was talking a lot more than usual today. Far behind them, on the rooftop of a tall building, three figures stood watching. Bulldozer, Laura, and the PhD zombie. Their piercing, predatory eyes locked onto the group below. Why is the boss hanging out with humans? Laura asked, her tone tinged with jealousy. Don't underestimate that human woman, the PhD said calmly. I doubt even you could take her on. TCH. Laura scoffed, unconvinced. If it weren't for the boss's orders, I'd have already cracked her skull open and eaten her brain. The PhD didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Bulldozer. The boss is tracking some humans who snuck into the territory. They're heading toward the area you were supposed to patrol, right? At Nobleman at. Yeah, but they've got it wrong, Bulldozer said confidently. I've been through that area a bunch of times. There's no way any humans could have gotten in. The three subordinates stood there, flanked by thousands of elite zombies below, all ready to act. For now, though, they were content to watch the drama unfold. Experience tales with Empire. ... By this time, Ethan and the group had reached the edge of his territory. Since the expansion, this was his first time patrolling this far out. From a distance, he caught the faint scent of blood in the air. There were definitely humans nearby. The street ahead used to be lined with karaoke bars, once a bustling nightlife hub filled with music, lights, and laughter. Now, it was a wasteland. The buildings were cracked and crumbling, signs had fallen, shattered glass littered the ground, and bloodstains were everywhere, mingling with the mangled remains of corpses. Abandoned cars sat rusting on the roadside, their surfaces covered in thick webs. One building stood out. Its first floor glass doors were shattered, weeds sprouted from the steps, and the interior was eerily quiet, just like the other ruins. But on the second floor, the windows had been boarded up. It was clear someone had been there. The modifications were unmistakable. Found it, Mia said, her sharp eyes fixed on the building. She had clearly sensed something too. Behind them, Chris frowned. The Blackhand Legion had a reputation for being ruthless and cruel, and he couldn't help but voice his concern. According to the intel, there are over 10 awakeners in there. They've also taken 3 hostages. The higher-ups want us to recover the supplies and rescue the hostages. Hostages, Ethan muttered under his breath. For some reason, the word felt foreign to him, like it didn't belong in his vocabulary. Chris hesitated, unsure how to respond, and decided to stay quiet. Sean glanced at Ethan. I've heard the Blackhand Legion is brutal. Maybe you should stay back and let us handle this. Brutal, Ethan repeated, the word rolling off his tongue with a strange familiarity. It's fine, he said casually. I'll go in with you. All right, but stick close to me, Sean said, nodding. He was confident in his abilities. After all, he was an awakener from Refuge 002. With that, the group headed straight for the karaoke bar. Inside the building, 13 members of the Blackhand Legion were gathered. Among them, 6 had developed crystal cores and awakened abilities, making them exceptionally powerful. One of the 6 stood out, a woman with short hair and a tattoo on the right side of her face. The tattoo depicted a black hand gripping a skull, giving her an unsettling, almost deranged appearance. She was a psychic awakener, with an extraordinary sense of perception. Suddenly, the woman stood up from the sofa. Gideon, someone's approaching us. Oh. The bald man leading the group narrowed his eyes, a dangerous glint flashing in them. Even hiding out in a place like this, they'd still been found. How many? 6. Only 2 of them have crystal cores, the woman replied. Despite her heightened abilities, she couldn't sense Ethan's presence at all. The bald man let out a cold snort. Just 2 awakeners with crystal cores, and they think they can come after us. Overconfident fools. Let's go meet them. Yeah. Heh heh heh. A man beside him chuckled sinisterly, clearly not taking the situation seriously. They left 3 people behind to guard the hostages, while the remaining 10 headed downstairs. By now, Ethan's group had entered the building. The crunch of shattered glass under their feet echoed through the first-floor lobby. It wasn't long before faint footsteps could be heard coming from upstairs. They're coming down, Mia said calmly, stepping forward on her own. Chris and the others were too weak in combat for her to rely on. She figured it would be faster to handle this herself. At the top of the staircase, a group of people appeared. Leading them was the bald man, his triangular eyes gleaming with malice. His eyebrows were completely shaved off, giving him an even more menacing look. This was Gideon Voss, a mid-level leader of the Blackhand Legion, known by his nickname, the Bald One. Behind him stood a motley crew of individuals, each with their own unique and intimidating appearance, nose rings, lip piercings, tattoos covering their faces. Their expressions were hostile as they sized up Mia. Well, it really is her, one of them said with a sly grin. A young man in a leather jacket, his eyes gleaming with excitement, stepped forward. Wait, you know her? Someone beside him asked, curious. Yeah, I've seen her profile on the Refuge network, the leather-jacketed man replied, his expression turning lecherous. He had come across Mia's photo on the network before. The moment he saw her, he was struck by her beauty. She was stunning, almost unreal. Ever since then, he'd fantasized about meeting her in person. And now, here she was, standing right in front of him. It felt like he'd hit the jackpot. What's more, he vividly remembered the short bio beneath her photo on the network. I'm a gentle girl, afraid of pain. I love gentle girls, the man said, licking his lips. Gideon, let me handle her. You've got good taste, Gideon said with a wicked grin. Go ahead, she's all yours. It wasn't that they were stupid or overly cocky. Mia's aura, when she wasn't actively fighting, was subdued. To them, she seemed like nothing more than an ordinary B-rank awakener. Most people wouldn't be able to sense her true strength. The leather-jacketed man's excitement was palpable. He crouched slightly, pulling a gleaming alloy dagger from a sheath strapped to his leg. The blade shimmered coldly, razor sharp. Hey, beautiful, let's have some fun. He sneered. In a flash, he lunged forward, the dagger aimed straight at Mia. His speed was impressive. He was a speed-enhanced awakener, and his movements were almost too fast to track. But Mia didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her large eyes fixed on him, unblinking. She didn't even flinch, let alone try to dodge. The glint of the dagger grew larger and larger in her pupils as it closed in, the blade mere inches from her face. Then, in an instant, Mia raised her hand and caught the blade mid-strike. SHHHK. Blood spurted from her palm, crimson streaks running down her wrist and staining her pale, porcelain skin. The vivid red stood out starkly against her white hand, creating a striking, almost surreal image. C50 not human. The sharp, searing pain coursed through her nerves, jolting every cell in her body into action. The killing instinct within her was on the verge of erupting. That single stab triggered Mia's awakening ability, deadly pain. Her aura surged, growing stronger by the second. On her right wrist, a bracelet displayed a glowing indicator. Pain level. 10%. Huh. The young man in the leather jacket immediately sensed something was wrong. He tried to pull his alloy dagger back, but Mia's grip was like a steel vice. No matter how hard he struggled, the blade wouldn't budge. In his frantic attempts to free the weapon, the dagger sank even deeper into her flesh. Blood oozed out, dripping through Mia's fingers. The pain level continued to rise. 15%. Crack. Mia suddenly exerted force, snapping the blade in half with her bare hands. Holding the broken shard, she lunged straight for the man's temple. Thud. The man didn't even have time to react. A sharp, stabbing pain exploded in his head as warm blood trickled down the side of his face. His vision blurred, and his consciousness began to fade. This is supposed to be the sweet girl. That was his final thought before his pupils dilated, and his lifeless body collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. In mere moments, Mia had taken down an awakener who had already formed a crystal core. Gideon and the others froze, their pupils contracting in shock. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The seemingly delicate girl had turned out to be utterly ruthless. She killed him that easily. Something's off about her. Everyone, stay alert. This girl is way more dangerous than she looks. Quote. The group's expressions grew grim. When Mia had killed the man, her face had remained calm, completely unperturbed. Her movements were precise, efficient, and merciless, clearly the work of someone who had done this many times before. Mia lowered her gaze to the corpse at her feet, as if suddenly remembering something. Slowly, she crouched down. Using the broken alloy blade, she pried open the man's skull. Then, with her pale fingers, she reached inside and began to rummage around. What the hell is she doing? Ethan couldn't help but ask, his curiosity piqued. Watching her movements, he was reminded of the time back at the orphanage when she helped prepare meals, kneading raw meat with her bare hands. The sticky, slimy sensation had been enough to make anyone gag. Before long, Mia found what she was looking for. She yanked out the man's crystal core, her hands now drenched in blood, along with bits of red and white matter clinging to her fingers. She stood up and walked over to Ethan, holding the bloodied core out to him. You gave me bread. I'm giving you a crystal core in return. Oh, Ethan nodded, realizing she'd been thinking about this the whole time. Just like before, she was still as impatient as ever. But as he looked at her outstretched hand, dripping with blood and other unidentifiable substances, he hesitated. Doesn't seem very sanitary, does it? It's fresh out of the skull. Still warm. Clean and hygienic, Mia replied, as if trying to reassure him. To Ethan, the scene was like someone spilling a bowl of beef stew on the floor, broth mixed with chunks of meat spreading everywhere, making it impossible to step anywhere without feeling queasy. He stayed rooted in place, unwilling to move. Mia's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly as she glanced at him, her expression puzzled. What are you hesitating for? It's just, eating like this doesn't feel very elegant, Ethan said, trying to keep a straight face. Quote. Mia's face darkened. Mimicking his earlier tone, she snapped, take it or leave it. The group of onlookers, including Gideon, stood frozen in place, too stunned to speak. This girl was terrifying. There was nothing gentle about her, contrary to what the leather-jacketed man had claimed. If anything, his death felt entirely deserved. At the same time, a question lingered in their minds. Is she really from the official shelter? Why does she seem even more brutal than us? The Blackhand Legion had done their share of atrocities, cannibalism, torture, murder, but there was one thing they lacked compared to Mia: her unnerving calmness. Wait. Hold on. Suddenly, Gideon noticed something alarming. He scanned the group in front of him, his eyes moving from Ethan to Chris, counting each person carefully. No matter how he counted, there was one extra person. Emily, didn't you say there were 6 of them? Why are there 7 now? The short-haired girl furrowed her brows, her expression growing increasingly grim. Gideon, one of them, doesn't seem human. What? Gideon's eyes widened in disbelief. He trusted Emily's psychic perception. It was rarely wrong. Not human. Then what were they? Following Emily's gaze, Gideon looked toward Ethan. He saw him casually pick up the blood-soaked crystal core and place it in his mouth, savoring it as though it were the sweetest delicacy. The answer became glaringly obvious. A zombie. Gideon's heart sank. The people from the official shelter were traveling with a zombie. The absurdity of the situation was almost too much to process. A wave of intense danger washed over him as he glanced around. Right now, their only advantage was their numbers. Forget everything else. Kill them. Everyone. Attack. Got it. The others nodded silently. In an instant, the battle erupted. Members of the Blackhand Legion activated their awakening abilities, their auras flaring like wild beasts ready to pounce. Mia turned her head to glance at Ethan, her expression still calm. Stay here. Don't move. I'll go collect a few more crystal cores. Ethan raised an eyebrow. But before he could respond, Gideon and his main fighters had already closed in on Mia. Gideon's awakening ability was metallic skin, which made his body incredibly durable. His skin shimmered as it transformed, his entire body covered in a gleaming silver layer. Every movement he made produced the sound of clashing steel, as though he were wearing a full suit of armor. With a swing of his massive fist, carrying the force of a wrecking ball, he aimed straight for Mia's face. Mia didn't flinch. She calmly raised her slender arm to block the attack. Boom. A dull thud echoed as Mia absorbed the blow, though the sheer force pushed her back several feet. Her arm trembled, a sharp pain radiating through it. Pain level 19%. Gideon's metallic face twisted into a grin. Now, hit her. Experience Tails at Empire. On it. Behind him, Emily responded immediately, unleashing a psychic attack. Her mental energy surged like a tidal wave, crashing into Mia's mind and triggering a mental storm. Mia's head felt like it had been doused in boiling oil. The excruciating pain clouded her thoughts, and her vision blurred as her consciousness began to waver. Gideon seized the opportunity, his massive fist swinging down again, this time aiming to crush her skull. But then, the numbers on Mia's bracelet shifted. Pain level 27%. Her eyes snapped into focus, their clarity cutting through the haze. The pain didn't weaken her, it made her stronger. In a flash, she clenched her fist and struck Gideon's chest with a speed too fast for the eye to follow. Boom. Even with his metallic body, Gideon's chest caved in under the impact. The sheer force of the blow sent him flying backward like a ragdoll, crashing through a wall and burying him under a pile of rubble. What? How is this possible? Emily's eyes widened in horror. Her leader, Gideon, had been sent flying despite her psychic attack. Her face twisted with rage, the Blackhand Legion tattoo on her cheek seeming to writhe like a living thing. But there was no time to dwell on it. She quickly turned her head, searching for Mia to launch another psychic assault. However, when she looked up, she was met with a pale, delicate face, Mia's face, already inches from her own.